Chapter 776. Seeing their expressions, Yi Ling asked again. Is it not? Yi Xian said with a smile. No. Yi Ling glanced at Yuan Xiaodao and smiled apologetically. Sister, don't mind it. Yuan Xiaodao sized up Yi Ling. Your physique is very special. Yi Ling grinned. A lot of people say that. Just as Yuan Xiaodao was about to speak, 3 bowls of steaming hot noodles were served. The boss smiled. 3 esteemed guests, please enjoy. Yi Ling did not stand on ceremony, and immediately started eating. Yi Xian smiled and also started eating. However, Yuan Xiaodao did not eat. Yi Ling looked at Yuan Xiaodao. Sister, are you not eating? Yuan Xiaodao smiled. Is it delicious? Yi Ling nodded. It's delicious. Saying that, she placed the egg in her bowl into Yuan Xiaodao's bowl. Sister, try it. Yuan Xiaodao looked at the bowl of noodles in front of her. After pondering for a moment, she picked up her chopsticks and started eating. Yi Xian glanced at Yuan Xiaodao and did not say anything. Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said softly, the smell of the mortal world. Yi Ling looked at Yuan Xiaodao. What do you mean? Yuan Xiaodao smiled. It's just that sister has almost forgotten the smell of the mortal world. Yi Ling still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Girl, you go back first. Brother will have a chat with this sister. Yi Ling glanced at Yi Xian. All right. After saying that, she stood up and left. However, when she left, she settled the bill. Yi Xian looked at Yuan Xiaodao. Thank you. He was thanking the other party for not making a move in front of Yi Ling. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. Shall we go somewhere else to talk? Yi Xian nodded. That's what I was thinking. After saying that, the two stood up and left. In the distant starry sky, Yi Xian stood quietly. Not far from him was Yuan Xiaodao, who had a smile on his face. Yi Xian did not make a move, because Yuan Xiaodao's divine sense had already locked onto him. Right now he was not confident that he could use the 6 paths of truth again, because he knew that Yuan Xiaodao would never give him the chance to use it. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Are you thinking about how to deal with me? Yi Xian smiled and said, I'm a little curious. I'm curious why you didn't attack directly. Because there's someone behind you. Yuan Xiaodao chuckled. Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Not far from him stood a woman. The purple-robed woman. Yi Xian was slightly startled. He didn't expect that the purple-clothed woman would actually come. Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said, I have to say, Yi Xian, you have given us too many surprises. Especially the people behind you. The people behind you are all stronger than the last. Logically speaking, these people should not be people you know, but they just happen to know you. After saying that, her gaze fell on the purple-robed woman. Take this person for example. Our deity Templar actually doesn't have any information about her. It's really unimaginable. Alian smiled. What? Is your deity Templar very interested in me? Yuan Xiaodao smiled. We are interested in the people behind him. The one we are most interested in is that plain-clothed woman. Alian shook her head and smiled. I'm a little curious. Your deity Templar should have a rough understanding of her strength. Of course, what you know is only what you know. Even so, in my opinion, you shouldn't underestimate her. Since that's the case, why do you keep targeting her? Is it because of this 5th dimension treasure? Yuan Xiaodao looked at Alian. Have you passed the 5th dimension? Alian shook her head. No. Qingqing Yi clan, ancestral hall ancestor. Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The speaker was an old man wearing a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed slightly to the people in the ancestral hall. She said timidly, Grand Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a young prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a matter of the clan. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was afraid and didn't dare to look at the Great Elder. But she didn't leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He's fighting for the clan, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove him from the position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. It's not up to a little girl like you to decide whether to remove him or not. Men drag her away. At this moment, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder said coldly. Then flogged 30 times. Soon 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now he's fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew it was his chance to show off. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position. Why are you shouting? He raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry. She just covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. I'm Zhang Mu. Greetings, Crown Prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the Crown Prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. I'm willing to go through fire and water for the Crown Prince. Yi Lang nodded slightly. Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show any mercy. Do you understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped when he saw something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking toward the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. This young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and said, Your man? As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian ignored Zhang Mu and walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's appearance, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be removed, and Yi Lang shall take over. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look, and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince. Why did you remove his title for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a clan matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He's fighting for the clan, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove his title. This is unfair. Impudent." The great elder suddenly raged. "It's not up to a little girl like you to decide whether to remove his title or not. Men drag her away." At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly. "Then flog her 30 times. Soon 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now he's fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered. "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's title. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry. She just held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. You'll be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply. "This subordinate will go through fire and water for the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Do you understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, his expression dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared. "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and snarled, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 777. Yi Xian blushed with shame and rejoiced at the same time. Fortunately, Qiao Tian'er was on his side. Otherwise, with her intelligence, he would be in trouble. In fact, he had suffered a great loss at her hands before. Fortunately, she was on his side now. Yi Xian said, "Miss Qiao, why don't you handle the auction?" Qiao Tian'er nodded. "The auction can't be held in Tianjiang City. If anything happens, it will implicate Tianjiang City. So we have to change the location." Yi Xian asked, "Where is the best place?" Qiao Tian'er looked up. Above the starry sky. Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. "Okay." Qiao Tian'er said, "I'll go prepare." Then she turned and left. Yi Xian looked up at the starry sky. The purple-clothed woman and Yuan Xiaodao were still fighting. The victor was still undecided. About an hour later, Lian appeared next to Yi Xian. Almost at the same time, Yuan Xiaodao appeared not far away. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Lian. "What a surprise!" Lian smiled. "What surprise?" Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian. "Why do you have so many people backing you?" Yi Xian was speechless. Lian laughed. "I also think that he has many people backing him. To be honest, what you see now is only a part of it. There are still some you haven't seen." Yuan Xiaodao raised his eyebrows. "Is that so?" Yi Xian quickly said, "Senior, do I really have many people backing me? Where are they? Tell them to come out." Lian looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "I lied to you." Yi Xian was speechless. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian. Just as she was about to speak, Yi Xian smiled and said, "Miss Yuan, this treasure of the fifth dimension is incomparably precious. I, Yi Xian, know that my luck is shallow and I am not worthy of this treasure. Therefore, I have decided to find a good master for it. In a few days, I'll be holding an auction. At that time, I'll be auctioning off this treasure, and the highest bidder wins it. Miss Yuan, you must attend." Hearing Yi Xian's words, Lian was stunned for a moment before she smiled. Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian. "You're not an ordinary thief." Yi Xian replied, "Miss Yuan, how can you say that about me? I'm doing this for your sake. Look, it's not easy for everyone to cultivate. Fighting and killing, how bad would it be if they hurt themselves? But now, we are using a peaceful method to decide the fate of this treasure of the fifth dimension. This is good for everyone. At that time, we can all sit down, drink tea, chat, talk about martial arts, talk about life." Yuan Xiaodao suddenly retorted, "Talk your ass." Yi Xian was stunned for a moment before he said, "You're cursing me." Yuan Xiaodao was expressionless. "I'm not cursing you," Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "Miss Yuan, please maintain the demeanor of a strong expert." Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian. "Are you really willing to hand over this treasure?" Yi Xian said in a serious tone, "Of course. This treasure naturally belongs to the strong. Look at me, my cultivation is so low and my strength is so weak. How can I have the qualifications to possess this treasure? Therefore, I've decided to auction it and give it to a true expert. At that time, Miss Yuan must attend." "Shut up." Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian and suddenly smiled. "Yi Xian, do you really think that you can play all the experts? Let me tell you, it's not a bad thing for you if they don't come out now. But if you let them come out, the situation will be out of your control. Moreover, don't treat these people as fools. They clearly know what you're thinking." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I'm really willing to give up." Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Shrine. Ancestor, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince will be removed and Yi Lang will inherit it. The speaker was an old man wearing a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. "Why?" At this time, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral shrine. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral shrine and said timidly, "Grand Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Grand Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince." "Impudent!" the Grand Elder suddenly raged. "Whether or not he is crippled, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new Prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning." The Grand Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new Prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply. "Subordinate will go through fire and water for the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian ignored Zhang Mu, walking up to Yi Ling. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides there were the Yi clan elders. Why? Right at this moment, A slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall and asked timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince." Impudent! The Great Elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The Great Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. This is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you shouting for?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. But she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. "I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was torn and tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt his head spin, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung. Chapter 778. Immortal State. After devouring a sword, he reached the immortal state. Above the immortal state was the end state. Above the end state was ascension. Above ascension was unknown. And above unknown was creation. His current realm was still on the low side. But luckily, the gap between him and the top experts of this world was getting smaller and smaller. Moreover, his body was at the unknown state, and his sword principle was at the peak of the true state. With his current combat power, it shouldn't be difficult for him to defeat an creation state expert without using any external items. If he used external items, he could even kill an earth-level deity. After all, be it the 6 paths of mantra, the immeasurable sword, or the sword gourd, they weren't something an earth-level deity could withstand. However, it was a pity that before he could declare himself king, the temple of gods sent a god over. A god. Even if he used all his external items, he still wouldn't be able to resist Yuan Xiaodao's strength. That damned woman. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. He had a feeling that no matter how much he improved, he would always have a super expert as his opponent. Couldn't she make him invincible for a while? Yi Xian shook his head again. A life of taking a beating. At this time, a woman appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was Qiao Tian'er. Qiao Tian'er looked at Yi Xian. "Everything is ready. We're just waiting for you." Yi Xian looked up at the sky and asked softly, "How many experts have come?" Qiao Tian'er shook her head. "I don't know, but there should be a lot of them." Yi Xian smiled. "Let's go and meet the top experts of the 4-dimensional universe." Then he turned into a ray of sword light and shot into the sky. Qiao Tian'er followed him. There was a palace floating in the sky. Qiao Tian'er had ordered people to build it over the past few days. The palace was far away from the Xuanhuan Great World. Even if there was a battle, it wouldn't affect the Xuanhuan Great World. At this moment, there was no one in the palace. In the center of the main hall, there was a tall pillar platform that was more than 100 feet tall. The pillar platform was about 50 to 60 feet in the air and was very wide. At this time, Yi Xian appeared on the platform. He looked around. There were some private rooms floating in the air, and they were all empty at the moment. No one. Yi Xian looked at Qiao Tian'er and asked, "No one's here." Qiao Tian'er said, "That depends on you." Yi Xian understood. He looked around and opened his palm. The World Prism Pagoda appeared in his palm. As the World Prism Pagoda appeared, a woman suddenly appeared nearby. The person who had arrived was none other than Yuan Xiaodao. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "Where am I?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Miss Yuan is such a powerful expert, so of course she is in the best position." As he spoke, he pointed to the private room directly opposite him. "Miss Yuan, this is it." Yuan Xiaodao glanced at the private room and said with a smile, "The position is excellent. Little fellow, perform well next. This is your life and death performance. I'm looking forward to it." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I won't disappoint Miss Yuan." Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "Good luck." After saying that, she disappeared. When she reappeared, she was already in the private room. From her position, she could see the platform where Yi Xian was. At this time, an old man walked in. The old man was dressed in a long black robe, his back ramrod straight like a javelin, giving off a spirited feeling. After the old man came in, he glanced at Yuan Xiaodao's position, then looked at Yi Xian. "Old man came uninvited, please forgive me." Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. "Why?" At this time, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is a crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the mining rights. He is fighting for the clan, and his life is uncertain. Yet, the clan is using groundless excuses to strip him of his crown prince position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied. Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. What are you shouting about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on, you'll be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply. This subordinate will go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'll do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian was like a ferocious tiger leaping in front of him. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man. As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked to Yi Ling's side, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang." The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the Yi clan elders. "Why?" Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look, and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, and asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince." "Impudent!" The great elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on you'll be my guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. "I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu saw something and suddenly stopped. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder squinted his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked to Yi Ling's side, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 779. A treasure of the fifth dimension. This was a treasure from the fifth dimension. The gazes of everyone had converged onto this precious treasure. In the private room, Yuan Xiaodao wasn't looking at the treasure, but at Yi Xian. At this moment, she really wanted to know how Yi Xian was going to deal with this. Even she didn't dare to look down on these people. Don't look down on these people because they were amiable. If they didn't like it, they would reveal their ferocious side. And now, everyone was looking at Yi Xian to see how he was going to perform. Because the people here weren't stupid. If Yi Xian wanted to play any tricks, it would be impossible. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Everyone might not know much about this treasure, so let me explain it to everyone. This treasure comes from the fifth dimension, and it's called the World Prism Pagoda. As for its function, I'm ashamed to say that I don't know much about it. If I knew much, I wouldn't have taken it out to sell, and would have directly dominated the fourth dimension. Laughter rang out in the room. Everyone knew what Yi Xian meant. He was at his wit's end. Yi Xian continued, As for whether this pagoda can enter the fifth dimension, I don't know. At least, I don't know the method. Otherwise, I would have directly escaped to the fifth dimension with it. When he spoke up to here, he glanced at the surroundings and said, I'll get straight to the point. I'll leave the wonders of this pagoda for the next owner to discover. Today I'm auctioning this item to let everyone know that I, Yi Xian, am willing to give up on this item. I hope that everyone can stop secretly plotting against me. With so many experts secretly plotting against me, I can't stand it. At this moment a voice rang out. Yi Xian is too modest. There shouldn't be anyone here who dares to look down on you. However, since Yi Xian sincerely wants to auction this item, I ask Yi Xian to name a price. Yi Xian smiled and said, This item cannot be measured by money or external objects. Of course, I am sincerely selling this item. Therefore, I only want the item that can help me the most at the moment. If there's anything you want, you can come up and trade with me alone. As long as I'm satisfied with what you offer, we can make a deal on the spot. In the private room, the corner of Yuan Xiaodao's mouth raised slightly. What a cunning little fellow. Yi Xian didn't clearly mark the price, which was the worst. Because you don't know what you have to take out to satisfy him. Moreover, he could choose who he would give the treasure to. The surroundings fell silent once more. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded. King Yi, rumor has it that you've activated this pagoda in the past. Can you allow us to witness its might? Yi Xian smiled and said, It's very exhausting. At this time, a fist-sized dark purple crystal fell in front of Yi Xian. The voice sounded, This item is the purple crystal soul. It can instantly restore King Ye's physical strength. In an instant, Yi Xian was visibly moved. If it could really recover in an instant, then it would be slightly abnormal. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he smiled and said, Since you want to see it, then I'll perform it and let everyone know that this item is indeed genuine. As soon as he finished speaking, he directly activated the World Prism Pagoda. In next to no time, the World Prism Pagoda started to tremble, and then a shapeless pressure appeared. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings changed when they sensed this pressure. A fifth-dimensional treasure. At this moment, no one doubted it any longer. Because with Yi Xian's current strength, it was absolutely impossible for him to create such a formidable pressure. In the private room, Yuan Xiaodao's gaze descended onto the World Prism Pagoda. Even though she'd obtained a fifth-dimensional treasure, she knew nothing about the pagoda like everyone else. Meanwhile, the pressure suddenly vanished, and everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, Everyone, this pagoda is filled with boundless profundities. Junior's strength is too low, so it's difficult for me to truly control it. Now if everyone is interested, then please make a bid. Bid. Still no one moved, because no one knew what Yi Xian wanted. Right at this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was the old man who'd arrived earlier, Yuan Zhen. Yuan Zhen waved his right hand, and a mysterious barrier appeared around him and Yi Xian. After that, he took out a pitch-black box and opened it. Within the box was a fist-sized pill. Yi Xian's expression instantly changed when he saw this pill. What pure energy! The pure energy contained within this pill wasn't any weaker than his eternal spring. Yuan Zhen gazed at Yi Xian. An earthly immortal pill. If you take it, with your current foundation, not only will your physique reach the level of an earthly immortal, but your cultivation will also directly reach the level of an earthly immortal. Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, so powerful? Yuan Zhen nodded. Yes. Yi Xian didn't say anything, but at this time, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind. This pill is indeed possible. I'm afraid there aren't many pills of this level left in this world. It was Alien's voice. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian looked at Yuan Zhen. Senior, please keep it. Once I've made my decision, I'll inform you. How about it? Yuan Zhen glanced at Yi Xian and nodded. Sure. With that, he turned around and disappeared. Yi Xian's eyes swept the surroundings. Anyone else? At this time, the middle-aged man, Han II, suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, if you give me this pagoda, I'll accept you as my disciple. How about it? Yi Xian smiled. Senior must be joking. Let's talk about something practical. Han II laughed. Then take a look at the treasure I'll give you. With that, he waved his right hand, and a pitch-black battle armor appeared in front of Yi Xian. The battle armor was pitch-black in color, as if it was made of some kind of scales. Between these scales, a pitch-black light flickered. Han II laughed. This item is called the Heaven-Soaring Battle Armor. It contains the battle god's power and protective power. If you have this armor, for a short period of time, you'll be able to contend against Yuan Xiaodao of the temple. Not only that, this item can also use the battle god's will to nourish your body, allowing your body to improve by several levels. Of course, there's definitely a gap between this item and your fifth-dimensional treasure. However, this is the best item I have. If you're willing to make a deal with me, I can promise you one thing. In the future, I can help you 3 times for free, at any time. 3 times for free. Needless to say, the other party's offer made Yi Xian a little tempted. However, he still didn't agree on the spot, because there were still people behind. Yi Xian smiled. I'm a little tempted. However, I want to see the treasures of the remaining people. Han II nodded and smiled. I understand. I'll wait for your decision. With that, he turned around and disappeared. Yi Xian looked around and said with a smile, Guys, is there anyone else? There was no movement. Yi Xian smiled. If there isn't, then I'll have to make a decision. At this moment, an old man appeared in front of him. The person who came was the old man with the ancient sword. He was also the person Alien told him to be careful of. The old man glanced at Yi Xian and opened his palm. In his palm was an ancient book. Yi Xian asked, This is? The old man said, Sword Scripture. This item records the sword doctrine of countless swordsmen, as well as the general outline of countless sword techniques. If you obtain this item and comprehend it, your sword doctrine will reach a new level. Apart from that, the old man can also promise to help you 3 times for free. Anytime. Anytime. Everyone knew that Yi Xian had a death grudge with the Temple of Light. Since the other party made this promise, it was obvious that he wasn't afraid of the Temple of Light. Yi Xian looked at the sword scripture and said, I also want to see what the Temple of Light will offer. The old man nodded. The old man also wants to see what the Temple of Light will offer. With that, he put away the sword scripture and left. Yi Xian looked at the box where Yuan Xiaodao was. In the next moment, Yuan Xiaodao appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. I wonder what Miss Yuan has prepared. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. What do you want? Yi Xian smiled. That depends on what Miss Yuan has to offer. Yuan Xiaodao glanced at Yi Xian and smiled. I'll give you a way out. Do you want it? Yi Xian smiled. Why? Does Miss Yuan want to use force on me? Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian. You're playing with fire, do you know that? Yi Xian smiled. Miss Yuan, I don't want to waste my breath on you. Just one sentence. Do you have anything? If not, then I'll have to make a choice. At that time, you'll have to find someone else. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. I don't have anything to give you. Yi Xian looked at Yuan Xiaodao and didn't say anything. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. You can choose someone else. Yi Xian walked in front of Yuan Xiaodao and smiled. Miss Yuan, I'll tell you a secret. If you don't grasp this opportunity, then your shrine will never have the chance to obtain this treasure again. Because once this treasure falls into the hands of an expert like you, his combat power, you know it. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian smiled. It's in my hands now. If your shrine wants to obtain it, you only need to pay a small price. But if it falls into someone else's hands, then your shrine will have to pay more than just a small price. So Miss Yuan, have you really thought it through? Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian for a moment and said with a smile. Don't think I don't know what you're trying to do. You want the divine hall to get this thing, and then the experts here will attack us together. Yi Xian smiled. That's exactly what I mean. But are you going to refuse? I refuse. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. Yuan Xiaodao smiled brightly. My shrine doesn't want it. You can give it to whoever you want. Yi Xian raised his head and looked around. May I ask who has a deep conflict with the shrine? At this time, Yuan Jin laughed. Old man. Old man comes from the dual realm sky. The force behind me has always been at odds with the shrine. The conflict is very deep. Yi Xian smiled. Is it very deep? Yuan Jin nodded. Very deep. Yi Xian said with a smile. Sir, I like that elixir in your hand. Yuan Jin laughed. He pointed with his finger, and the earth immortal pill fell in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't hesitate. He pointed with his finger, and the world prism pagoda flew in front of Yuan Jin. At the same time, he directly swallowed the earth immortal pill. Yuan Jin laughed heartily. Everyone farewell. After saying that, he turned into a black light and disappeared. At this moment, there was a ball of fire burning around his body. After absorbing the earth immortal pill, he felt a surge of pure energy coursing through his body. At this moment, he was starting to believe Yuan Jin's words. This pill could really increase his strength by leaps and bounds. He had to find more of this kind of pill. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and began to frantically absorb the energy. Somewhere in the starry sky, Alian stood quietly, her gaze fixed on the distance. Although the northern region was calm, in fact, the black-yellow great world was not at peace. This was just the beginning. The fifth-dimensional treasure. Some people had already begun to fight over the fifth-dimensional treasure, because at this moment, a mysterious man in black was fighting with Yuan Jin. And in the darkness, countless experts were spying on them. In the starry sky, Alian glanced at the northern region below and said softly, Is this little guy really going to give up just like that? At this moment, she suddenly turned her head and looked. Not far away, a woman was walking over. The person who had come was Yuan Xiaodao. Yuan Xiaodao glanced not far away and said with a smile, He really knows how to scheme. This way, everyone's conflict will be shifted from him. But is he really willing to give up the fifth-dimensional treasure just like that? Alian said with a smile. Aren't you very smart? Why are you still asking me? Yuan Xiaodao was silent for a moment, then said, His intentions are very clear, but we also know that he won't give up this pagoda so easily. And this pagoda is not fake. Alian said with a smile. So, you guys are a bit confused about his intentions now. Am I right? Yuan Xiaodao nodded. Yes. Alian shrugged. I also don't know. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Alian. If he really gives up this pagoda, our temple will not need to target him anymore. Alian said with a smile. Why? Aren't you afraid of him growing up? Yuan Xiaodao said softly. In the past, the biggest reason we targeted him was the fifth-dimensional treasure, but now that it is no longer with him, it is not worth it for our temple to continue targeting him. Alian smiled and turned her head to look into the distance. She did not want to get too involved in the grudge between Yi Xian and the temple. Her meeting with Yi Xian this time was also unexpected. She could not interfere too much with Yi Xian's future. She could not do anything about it. The only thing she could do was to protect him on his journey. Yuan Xiaodao looked at the mysterious man in black who was fighting with Yuan Jin not far away. Guess who he is? Alian shook her head. It has nothing to do with me. Yuan Xiaodao smiled and did not say anything else. She looked into the distance, where the battle was getting more and more intense. Not long after, Yuan Jin suddenly turned around and fled, not because he could not win, but because he chose to leave first. However, the mysterious black-clothed man did not give up. He chased after Yuan Jin with all his might. In the dark, many people were closely following him. Yuan Xiaodao said with a smile, "Let's go and watch, it will be very interesting." After saying that, she disappeared not far away. Alian also followed. She also wanted to see how things would develop. On the other side, two women stood quietly. They were Lian Qian and Yin Jia. Yin Jia said softly, "Did he really give up just like that?" Lian Qian rolled her eyes. "Stupid girl. Others might not understand his intentions, but you do." Yin Jia looked at Lian Qian. "What do you mean?" Lian Qian smiled. "Everyone thinks that he chooses the pagoda. But they don't know that it is the pagoda that chooses people. Even if he gives up the pagoda, it will still come back." Yin Jia asked, "It will definitely come back?" Lian Qian nodded. "It will definitely come back because it has no other choice." Yin Jia said softly, "The 8th and 9th floors?" Lian Qian nodded. She looked into the distance and said softly, "If it doesn't come back, the 8th and 9th floors will kill it. They won't be able to destroy its body, but it is possible to erase its consciousness. The 8th and 9th floors will only be afraid of it if it comes back with Yi Futian, because there is a lady in a plain dress standing behind him." Yin Jia said solemnly, "But it might not be able to return." Lian Qian smiled. "That Yi Futian must have a backup plan. Let's wait and see." Yin Jia nodded. Lian Qian suddenly asked, "Has you found news of Big Sister?" Yin Jia shook his head. "I contacted her, and she said that she got some news of Big Sister, but it was cut off again." When she heard that, Lian Qian frowned. It was cut off again. A moment later, Lian Qian said softly, "Let her continue to find out. No matter what, we have to find Big Sister." Yin Jia nodded. "Understood." Northern region. At this moment, Yi Xian was still crazily absorbing the pure energy in his body. His aura was also crazily rising. What was worth mentioning was that he had reached End Realm. Not only had his cultivation reached End Realm, but his body was also transforming. Earth Celestial Pill. At this moment, Yi Xian realized that this Earth Celestial Pill was much more terrifying than he had imagined. This kind of medicinal pill was truly priceless. Unfortunately, he didn't get the Ling Tian battle armor and sword scripture, otherwise, his strength would have increased greatly. However, he had no choice. In comparison, this Earth Celestial Pill was much more useful to him. That was because what he lacked the most now was cultivation. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. His aura was still crazily rising, and he couldn't stop at all. Apart from that, his body was also transforming. As for what level, he didn't know. He only knew that his body was itchy like there were ants crawling on it. About 4 hours later, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body, causing the surrounding space to tremble. It was quite a shocking sight. Ascension. He directly went from End Realm to Ascension. Actually, between End Realm and Ascension, there was still half a step Ascension. However, he directly crossed this realm. At the end of the day, half step to the Ascended Seal Realm was actually touching the threshold of the Ascended Seal Realm. To put it simply, one's own cultivation and state of mind were not enough. Therefore, one could only be considered to be half-step to the Ascended Seal Realm, and not truly in the Ascended Seal Realm. However, Yi Xian didn't have such a problem. This was because he had fought too many Ascension Realm and above experts. In terms of Heart Realm, he had no problems at all. However, after reaching Ascension Realm, Yi Xian started to crazily suppress his realm. That was because, with his current situation, if he directly reached the unknown, or even Earth's celestial realm, there would be huge problems. Raising his realm too quickly wasn't a good thing. He had to stabilize the Ascension realm before charging for the unknown and Earth's celestial realm. He had to walk slower. While he was crazily suppressing his realm, his body actually started to shake. Not only that, but the bloodline in his body started to stir once more. Yi Xian was shocked, and he quickly suppressed it. However, he was shocked to realize that he couldn't suppress that energy. Especially after the bloodline power started to stir, he couldn't suppress it anymore. Yi Xian's expression changed, and he knew that things weren't good. He clasped his hands together and suppressed the strong energy in his body once more. However, it was useless. The aura around him became stronger and stronger. Just like that, after an hour, Honglong, a strong aura suddenly spread out from within Yi Xian's body. All of a sudden, the surrounding space started to shake intensely. It was really shocking. P.S. Let me give everyone a red packet. Remember to snatch it. Chapter 781. The Unknown Realm. Yi Xian's expression turned ugly. He didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to suppress it. He directly went from Dingfeng to the Unknown Realm. This jump was too big. Moreover, the energy in his body hadn't disappeared yet. Yi Xian was shocked and didn't dare to continue breaking through. He began to frantically suppress it again. Gradually, the energy in his body calmed down. Sensing this, Yi Xian let out a sigh of relief. If he directly reached the creation realm, his foundation would definitely be unstable. This was because the jump was too big. Even now, it was a bit too big. Right now he had to stabilize his own realm. Yi Xian sat cross-legged and began to calm the violent energy in his body and his bloodline. He had a headache when it came to the power of the bloodline, because it would come out from time to cause trouble, and he couldn't do anything about it. If this was someone else's blood, he would have thrown it away long ago. It always gave him trouble at the critical moment. If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of this bloodline power, he could have suppressed it. Don't think about it. Yi Xian got up and glanced at his body. At this moment, there was a flickering light between his skin, as if there was an extra layer of luster on his skin. Earth immortal body? Yi Xian shook his head. No, his current physical body should be at the peak of the creation realm, still a little bit away from the Earth immortal level. This was because when he suppressed his realm, he also suppressed his physical body. However, this was also a good thing. Whether it was his realm or his physical body, suppressing them one by one was still good. Yi Xian took a deep breath and slowly clenched his right hand. In an instant, a powerful force gathered in his body. Boundless power. At this moment, what he felt was endless power. Now, if he used all his trump cards, he might be able to face Yuan Xiaodao head-on. Yi Xian left the main hall. Outside the hall, Shengguan Xian'er and Jiang Jiu had been waiting for a long time. Yi Xian looked at the two women. What's wrong? Shengguan Xian'er said in a low voice. They are fighting for the fifth-dimensional treasure. Yi Xian said with a smile. As expected. The temptation of that treasure was absolutely irresistible to those super experts. But now, he felt his whole body relax. Because after handing over the pagoda, the enemies seemed to have disappeared without a trace. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian hurriedly brought the two women to find Xiaolinger. At this moment, Xiaolinger was concocting pills in her private courtyard. Her current concocting pills was much better than before. Previously, she would throw in all the materials at once. But now, she knew how to choose the materials. Moreover, they would do it in order. Although there weren't many good elixirs that came out, his alchemy skills were still improving. Seeing the arrival of Yi Xian and the other two, Xiaolinger quickly stopped. She flew in front of them and grinned. Looking at Xiaolinger, Shengguan Xian'er and Jiang Jiu looked at each other and smiled. This little fellow was very popular in the north. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiaolinger's little head and said with a smile, "Can you let me see that alchemy scripture?" Little Ling blinked her eyes and hurriedly took it out. Yi Xian took the alchemy scripture and flipped through it. After a while, his face revealed an ecstatic expression. Found it. The two women looked at the last second page of the alchemy scripture. There was a method to concoct pills. Earth immortal pill. There really was an Earth immortal pill. Yi Xian was ecstatic. He didn't expect that this alchemy scripture would Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Temple. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the heir is removed and Yi Lang will succeed him. The speaker was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a teenager with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral temple. Everyone turned to look, and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the heir. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a matter of the clan. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men drag her away. At this time, the new heir, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly. Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new heir, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of heir. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply. I'll go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'll die 1,000 deaths for you. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood. Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him. asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess. As he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Peng! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the great elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the rights to the mine. He is fighting for the clan, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair." "Impudent!" the great elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. "Young master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position, and it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and said with a smile, "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on, you'll be my personal guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through water and tread on fire for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back." "Understood." Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The great elder's eyes narrowed, and his face darkened. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 782. It's back in my hands again? Yi Xian was shocked. The others were stunned as well. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly reached out to catch the prism pagoda. As soon as he caught the prism pagoda, countless powerful auras enveloped him. The two strongest auras belonged to the black-robed man and the mysterious black-robed man. The two gave up on Yuanzhen. However, they didn't dare to act rashly, because Al Yin was standing in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at Yuanzhen, who was not far away. Sir, what do you mean by this? I don't understand. Yuanzhen looked at Yi Xian. I'll leave it with you for now. Yi Xian said seriously, Senior, are you joking? I've already sold it to you. I, Yi Xian, am a gentleman. I won't take back what I've sold. Of course, if it's a gift from you, then it's a different story. Yuanzhen said solemnly, Yi Xian for now. Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand. Senior, don't take me for a fool. You left it with me temporarily, because you want to use me as a shield for you. Let me ask you, do you want it or not? If you want it, I'll give it to you now. Yuanzhen looked at Yi Xian. Little friend Yi Xian, can't you help the old man? Yi Xian smiled. Help? Senior Yuanzhen, you can't help like this. Moreover, you threw it in front of me to use me. Senior, I don't want to be enemies with others. I'll ask you one last time, do you want it or not? If you don't want it, I'll give it to someone else. Yuanzhen's expression was ugly. He was hesitant. If he wanted it now, he would be attacked by both of them. Moreover, he was injured and had no chance to defeat them. He didn't even have the chance to escape. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly turned to the right. Senior, if you want it, you can exchange it with me. There stood an old man wielding an ancient sword. This old man was the very dangerous old man that Elaine had told him about. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. In the next moment he waved his right hand, and an ancient scripture landed in front of him. Yi Xian didn't stand on ceremony. He put away the ancient scripture and pointed out with a finger. The World Prism Pagoda directly flew in front of the old man. The old man put away the World Prism Pagoda and turned to leave. Meanwhile, the gazes of many descended onto the old man. The old man did not care about the gazes of the crowd. He did not fly away. Instead, he walked slowly. He was a little arrogant. At this moment, the mysterious black-robed man and the black-robed man suddenly appeared in front of the old man. The old man didn't waste any time. He suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Chi! A tearing sound suddenly rang out. Rumble! The black-robed man in the lead was instantly blasted thousands of meters away. Not only that, but as soon as he stopped, his entire body was directly dismembered into thousands of pieces. His soul was destroyed. Everyone was stunned. Yi Xian was also shocked. He was killed with a single slash. Yuan Xiaodao and Elaine's expressions became solemn at this moment. A single slash. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. The old man paid no attention to the crowd and continued forward. At this moment, no one else made a move. Yi Xian looked at Yuan Xiaodao. Miss Yuan, Aren't you going to rob it? If you miss this opportunity, it will be as difficult as ascending the heavens to get it in the future. Yuan Xiaodao glanced coldly at Yi Xian. Shut up. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Yuan, don't tell me you can't beat him? If you can't beat him, then just say it. I won't laugh at you. Really you? Yuan Xiaodao suddenly wanted to make a move, but Yi Xian turned around and fled. Yuan Xiaodao glanced coldly at Yi Xian, and then looked into the distance. The old man's figure was getting further and further away, but he was still walking very slowly. It was as if he was waiting for someone to make a move. In the surroundings, no one made a move. The old man's strength was too terrifying. At this moment, the old man not far away had completely disappeared. Yuan Xiaodao fell silent for a moment, then also disappeared. Soon the surrounding experts also disappeared. Yi Xian walked to Elaine's side, and Elaine softly said, You really gave up? Yi Xian smiled. Could it be fake? Elaine looked at Yi Xian. Why? Yi Xian fell silent. Elaine smiled. Can't you say it? Yi Xian smiled. There's nothing I can't say to you, senior. Actually, it's that tower that's become dangerous. Elaine frowned. What do you mean? Yi Xian softly said. There's a dangerous guy coming out. Elaine asked, How dangerous? Yi Xian solemnly said. Very, very dangerous. The 8th floor. The 8th floor had been awake for a long time. Not long ago, Lian Qian told him that the 8th floor might be coming out. Of course, that wasn't the only reason why he auctioned the tower. The main reason was that he couldn't fight against so many experts. If he gave it up temporarily, he could protect himself and buy himself more time. If he didn't, he and the entire northern region would be targeted. Most importantly, the tower wouldn't be of much use to him. Of course, he didn't really want to give up on the tower. The world didn't know that the tower didn't choose the tower, but the tower chose the people. Elaine glanced at Yi Xian then nodded. No matter what, you have to be careful. Yi Xian asked, Senior, are you leaving? Elaine shook her head. Let's wait a little longer. Yi Xian softly said. Thank you. Elaine smiled but didn't say anything. Yi Xian didn't say anything else, just turned and left. He had to study the sword scripture. As for the prison tower, he didn't want to worry about it anymore. Elaine glanced at Yi Xian, then turned and left without a word. In the distant starry sky, the old man walked slowly, holding the prison tower tightly in his right hand. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the old man suddenly stopped. The old man looked at the prison tower in his hand. From the outside, there didn't seem to be anything special about it, just like an ordinary tower. But at this moment he felt a trace of danger. Danger! That was what he felt at this moment. The old man frowned slightly. At this moment he suddenly looked to the right. A woman walked out from there. The person was Yuan Xiaodao. The old man looked at Yuan Xiaodao. What, you want to snatch it too? Yuan Xiaodao smiled. Sword Venerable, your sword Dao has reached the pinnacle. Why ruin your sword Dao heart for this tower? The old man was expressionless. Your sword Dao has reached the pinnacle. Why do you care about this item? Yuan Xiaodao smiled. Do you really think that Yi Xian will hand it over willingly? The old man said. This item is in my hands now. Yuan Xiaodao looked at the old man then smiled. Take care. The old man retracted his gaze and continued walking into the distance. After the old man left, a white-robed man appeared behind Yuan Xiaodao. The white-robed man wore a bamboo hat and had a long sword by his waist. The white-robed man said, The two of us can take him down. Yuan Xiaodao shook her head. There's no need. The white-robed man frowned. Why? Yuan Xiaodao said softly. Because there's a problem. The white-robed man said. You're still worried about that Yi Xian? Yuan Xiaodao nodded. That person isn't a good person. Since he took the initiative to hand it over, there's definitely a problem. If we get this tower now, we'll make countless enemies. The white-robed man said. Are we going to give up just like that? Yuan Xiaodao turned to look at the white-robed man. Why are you talking so much nonsense? After saying that, she turned around and disappeared. After a moment of silence, the white-robed man also disappeared. Northern region. At this moment, Yi Xian was studying the sword scripture. He had to admit that this sword scripture had shocked him. The most shocking thing about the sword scripture was that it contained countless swordsmen's understanding of the sword Tao. It was extremely detailed. The more Yi Xian read, the more infatuated he became. Building a cart behind closed doors definitely wouldn't work. What he needed the most now was to learn other people's sword Tao. Only then would he be able to reach the next level. If his sword Tao attainments were to reach the next level, he would have a higher chance of winning against Yuan Xiaodao. Above the true state was brightness. And this brightness pointed to the heart, things and everything. This was actually the enlightened sword heart. However, this enlightened sword heart didn't just refer to one's heart, but also one's understanding of one's sword Tao. Thoroughly understand everything one had learned, and thoroughly understand one's understanding of sword Tao. This was brightness, and what he needed to do now was to achieve brightness. This sword scripture happened to be able to help him, because he could verify his current sword Tao through these sword Tao experiences. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. For the rest of the time, Yi Xian didn't leave his room. In the depths of the starry sky, the old man was still walking away. He was still walking very slowly, because there were still people following him in the dark. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the old man stopped. He looked at the World Prism Pagoda in his hand. The World Prism Pagoda hadn't moved, but he felt increasingly uneasy. Danger! The more he held the pagoda, the more dangerous he felt. How could it be dangerous? The old man frowned. After a moment of silence, he suddenly released his sword intent. The sword intent directly enveloped the World Prism Pagoda. The World Prism Pagoda trembled slightly, and in the blink of an eye, the sword intent around the World Prism Pagoda disappeared. Seeing this, the old man's frown deepened. He stared at the World Prism Pagoda for a very long time. Finally, he said in a low voice, "You have spiritual intelligence." The old man has no other desires but to improve his sword Tao. As long as you can help the old man improve his sword Tao, the old man is willing to set you free. The World Prism Pagoda didn't respond. The old man was about to speak again when the space in front of him suddenly trembled. Very quickly a woman walked out. Yuan Xiaodao. The old man glanced at Yuan Xiaodao. "What is it?" Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "Sword Venerable, let me give you a word of advice. You have always been a loner. I'm afraid this treasure isn't something you can possess." The old man said calmly, "You don't have to worry about that." Yuan Xiaodao roared with laughter, and then he said, "Sword Exalt, you seem to have forgotten something. Yi Xian is able to control the pagoda, so why don't you learn the method to control it from him?" Hearing this, the Sword Venerable frowned. He had almost forgotten about this. P.S. Let me give everyone another red packet. Remember to snatch it. Chapter 783. Venerable Sword turned and left. Behind him, Yuan Xiaodao smiled brightly. At this moment, she seemed to have thought of something, and her expression changed. Not good. After saying that, she disappeared. Northern region. Venerable Sword had just arrived in the northern region, when Alian appeared in front of him. Looking at Alian, Venerable Sword's eyes were solemn. Alian asked, "What's the matter?" Venerable Sword nodded. "I want to ask how to control this tower." Just as Alian spoke, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of her. Alian glanced at Yi Xian. "What's the matter?" Yi Xian smiled. "I came to talk to this senior." He looked at Venerable Sword. "Senior wants to control this tower?" Venerable Sword nodded. Yi Xian smiled. "Senior, let's talk somewhere else?" Venerable Sword nodded. "All right." The two came to a small courtyard. Yi Xian made an inviting gesture. "Senior, please." Venerable Sword sat down and looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said with a smile, "Sir, I won't play games with you. I have no way to control this tower." Venerable Sword looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian continued, "Because I have no way to control this tower. If I could, I would have brought it to the 5th dimension. But," saying this, he looked at Venerable Sword. "I can bring Senior into this tower." Venerable Sword asked, "Enter this tower?" Yi Xian nodded. "I can bring Senior in. As for controlling this tower, Senior should know that this tower has a spirit. Whether you can gain its approval depends on you." Venerable Sword nodded. "Bring me in." Yi Xian stretched out his hand. Venerable Sword did not hesitate, and took out the prison tower for Yi Xian. Yi Xian held the World Prism Pagoda. The next moment, he entered the World Prism Pagoda with Venerable Sword. At this moment, the prison tower was empty, because Lil Ling and Lian Qian, who were still alive, had been brought out by him. When he saw the true appearance of the World Prism Pagoda, Honorable Sword was stunned. Shocking. Even an expert like him was shocked when he saw the true appearance of the World Prism Pagoda, a fifth-dimensional treasure. Next to Venerated Sword, Yi Xian smiled and said, "Senior, this pagoda has a total of 9 floors. You can't go to the 8th and 9th floors, but you can go to the other floors. However, they are all empty." Venerable Sword looked at Yi Xian. "There are people on the 8th and 9th floors?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." Venerable Sword asked, "Who is it?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't know either." As he spoke, he told Venerable Sword about the origin of the World Prism Pagoda. He didn't hide much, but he didn't tell him everything either. After a while, Sword Venerable looked up. "I feel a sense of danger. It should be the 8th or 9th floor." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yes, everything inside is very dangerous." Venerable Sword looked at Yi Xian. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly disappeared. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides there were the Yi clan elders. "Why?" Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince." "Impudent!" The Great Elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times, as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you shouting for?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on, you'll be my guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed deeply. "I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang, and just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 784. At this moment, Yuan Xiaodao was a little crazy. How long has it been since we last met? The guy in front of him actually broke through again. Moreover, his sword Dao realm actually reached the clear mirror realm. Even if he was cheating, he shouldn't be this crazy. The white-robed man behind Yuan Xiaodao also had a gloomy expression. He didn't expect that in such a short time, Yi Xian would actually reach the clear mirror realm. This was too unbelievable. Yi Xian smiled slightly. "I just drank some water and had some enlightenment. Then I broke through." Hearing this, Yuan Xiaodao almost went berserk. Drank water? Broke through just by drinking water? Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian with undisguised killing intent in his eyes. This Yi Xian is too crazy. If he continues to grow like this, who can stand it? Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Yuan, did you find Senior Sword venerable?" Yuan Xiaodao's eyes gradually turned cold. "Yi Xian, did Sword Venerable leave the northern region?" Yi Xian frowned, his face full of doubt. "Of course he left the northern region. Otherwise, why would he stay here? I'm not particularly familiar with him." Yuan Xiaodao just stared at Yi Xian, while Yi Xian had an innocent expression. After a moment, Yuan Xiaodao shook his head. "Yi Xian, what kind of tricks are you playing?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "Miss Yuan, you might have some misunderstanding about me. I, Yi Xian, am a very upright person. Every word I say is from my conscience. Senior Sword Venerable really isn't in the northern region." Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian. "Then, where do you think he is?" Yi Xian smiled. "I don't know about that. However, I have a small suggestion." Yuan Xiaodao asked. "Speak," Yi Xian said seriously. "Miss Yuan, think about it. With my strength, I can barely exchange 2 moves with you after obtaining the pagoda. Now that the pagoda has fallen into Senior Sword Venerable's hands, think about it. What kind of person is Senior Sword Venerable? Once he truly gained control of this pagoda, he might be able to unify the entire 4-dimensional universe. As for your temple, I'm afraid that you'll never be able to enter this pagoda. So I suggest that you hurry up and chase after him. Take back the pagoda before he completely controls it. Otherwise, you can go back to your temple obediently." Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said with a smile, "Miss Yuan, I don't have a 5th-dimensional treasure anymore. It's meaningless for you to target me, isn't it?" A moment later, Yuan Xiaodao turned around and left. Soon, the two of them disappeared into the horizon. At this moment, A voice rang out from the horizon. Yi Xian. Yuan Xiaodao's voice. Yi Xian looked at the sky, but Yuan Xiaodao didn't say anything. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned around and left. Sword Venerable disappeared. This news quickly spread to countless star regions. Everyone knew that Sword Venerable possessed a fifth-dimensional treasure, yet he had disappeared. It could be said that countless forces and experts were looking for Sword Venerable, including the temple. The temple was also looking for Sword Venerable. However, it was as if Sword Venerable had evaporated into thin air. There was no news at all. However, this didn't mean that things were over, as more and more forces joined the search for Sword Venerable. At this moment, the black-yellow great world was very calm. This was because no one was paying attention to the black-yellow great world, including the temple. Now all their energy was focused on Sword Venerable. In the royal palace, Yi Xian, Shengguan Xian and Jiang Jiu were discussing how to develop the northern region. In fact, he was the one listening, nodding, or shaking his head. After 2 hours, everything was basically settled. At this moment, Shengguan Xian said in a deep voice, Dao sect, they still want the territory of the temple, which is your Elysium's territory above the sky. Hearing this, Yi Xian frowned slightly. They haven't given up yet? Shengguan Xian nodded. They haven't given up yet. And they have been contacting Little Seven. Little Seven? Yi Xian said softly. She hasn't come out of seclusion yet. Shengguan Xian nodded. Not yet, but she should be out soon. Recently, the aura coming from her room has been very frequent. And it's very strong. Very strong. Yi Xian nodded slightly and smiled. When she comes out, we will have another super expert on our side. He was very clear about Little Seven's talent. Little Seven's talent was definitely above his, and she had obtained the Human King's inheritance. It could be said that once she came out of seclusion, her strength would probably exceed everyone's expectations. Not to mention, he really missed Little Seven now, because among the people of the same age in the northern region, only Little Seven could compare to him. And Lanxiu and Mo Xie. Thinking of these two people, Yi Xian looked at Jiang Jiu and Shengguan Xian. How are Lanxiu and Mo Xie now? Shengguan Xian smiled. Both of them are very strong, very, very strong, especially Missin. She can now suppress an unknown realm expert. Moreover, she is always looking for Senior Guanjun to exchange pointers, so her strength can be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. Yi Xian nodded slightly. He looked into the distance and said softly, Does this Dao sect think that I'm too easy to talk to? Hearing this, Shengguan Xian lowered her head slightly. She knew that Yi Xian was a little angry. That's right. This Dao sect has repeatedly come to cause trouble. Who would be angry? Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, a little girl suddenly rushed in. The person who came was Xiaolinger, and in Xiaolinger's hand, there were 2 thumb-sized medicinal pills. Xiaolinger quickly ran in front of Yi Xian. She handed the 2 medicinal pills to Yi Xian and grinned. Here, medicinal pills. Yi Xian looked at the 2 medicinal pills. They were the Earth Immortal pills. They were exactly the same. Yi Xian was stunned. Did Xiaolinger really succeed? Yi Xian looked at Xiaolinger. At this moment, Xiaolinger's face was covered with soot, her clothes were tattered, and her face was full of exhaustion. She was tired. Seeing this, Yi Xian suddenly felt a pang in his heart. He squatted down and said softly, Are you very tired? Xiaolinger grinned. She handed the 2 medicinal pills to Yi Xian. Here. Yi Xian did not take the 2 Earth Immortal pills. He gently wiped the soot off Xiaolinger's face and said softly, Thank you. Xiaolinger looked at Yi Xian. Suddenly she gently hugged Yi Xian. Family. In Xiaolinger's heart, Yi Xian was family. Whether it was planting spiritual trees or refining medicinal pills. Other than the fact that it was fun, she also wanted to help Yi Xian. She also cared about Yi Xian, and wanted to help Yi Xian. But she never knew how to express it. Yi Xian hugged Xiaolinger and said with a smile, Go and have a good rest first, okay? Xiaolinger blinked. Do you still want more? I can still do it. Yi Xian said softly, Rest first. Have a good rest. After you rest, you can refine, okay? Xiaolinger looked at Yi Xian. I'm not tired, Yi Xian said seriously. Listen to me and rest first, okay? Xiao Linger thought for a while and said softly, okay. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiao Linger's head and said with a smile, go and rest. Xiao Linger hesitated for a while. Then, she hugged Yi Xian and disappeared. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the 2 medicinal pills in front of him. Earth Immortal Pill. He really didn't expect that Xiao Linger could actually refine this Earth Immortal Pill. Earth Immortal Pill. The reason why his strength increased so much was because of this item. And now, he had 2 Earth Immortal Pills. Yi Xian looked at Shangguan Sienna and Jiangjiu. Shangguan Sienna quickly said, I don't want this. It's a waste to give this to me. Really, give it to someone who needs it. Jiangjiu nodded. The difference in our cultivation is too big. It's a waste to give this to us. Yi Xian thought for a while and said, you two wait for a while. In any case, Xiao Linger can refine it. Don't refuse it. This item is also very beneficial to you. After all, you need to cultivate, don't you? Shangguan Sienna was about to speak when Jiangjiu suddenly said, okay. Shangguan Sienna looked at Jiangjiu and said with a smile, it's a waste if you don't want it. Yi Xian smiled slightly. Little Jiu is right. In any case, there are benefits to take. You two don't need to be polite, understand? He wouldn't be stingy with these 2 women, because they had helped him too much. After chatting with the 2 women for a while, Yi Xian left the palace and came to a courtyard. As soon as he arrived, a woman walked out from a room not far from him. She was dressed in clothes as white as snow. It was precisely Enlancio. Enlancio walked over to Yi Xian, and she sized up Yi Xian. The clear mirror sword Dao. Yi Xian nodded and smiled. Yes, Enlancio nodded slightly, and didn't say anything else. Yi Xian withdrew an earthly immortal pill, and passed it to Enlancio. This is for you. Enlancio looked at the earthly immortal pill. This is... Yi Xian smiled. An earthly immortal pill. With your foundation, this item might allow you to directly attain the earthly immortal realm. Enlancio's natural talent was absolutely not inferior to him and Xiaoqi. However, she lacked some violet essence. If she had sufficient resources, then with her natural talent, her accomplishments would absolutely be limitless. Enlancio looked at Yi Xian. You ate this earlier? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Enlancio nodded slightly. She didn't refuse. After she put away the pill, she looked at Yi Xian. Wait for me to come out of closed-door cultivation. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Out of closed-door cultivation, Yi Xian looked at the small house not far away. He knew that after Enlancio came out, her strength would undergo an earth-shattering change. Yi Xian was silent for a moment before he turned around and left. Not long later, he found Emosia and gave the remaining pill to her. Emosia was the most suitable person now. After chatting with Emosia for a while, Yi Xian left Emosia's courtyard. Emosia also began to cultivate in seclusion. Yi Xian returned to his courtyard and entered the Prism Pagoda. This time, Yi Xian didn't look for Sword Venerable to ask for pointers. Now he had a more important matter, and that was the 8th floor. The 8th floor had been restless for a long time, and he couldn't figure out the 8th floor's intentions. What was the 8th floor trying to do? Yi Xian came before the 8th floor. He looked at the seal in front of him and smiled. Senior, let's have a chat? A moment later, a voice came from within. Sure. P.S. Recently I've seen 7th Sister Unfettered 1 Sprite, when Tion, and some active readers. All my old friends are here. Thank you for not leaving me. Chapter 785. The 8th floor. Yi Xian had always felt that the real danger was not the temple, or the experts of the dual realm sky. It was the Prism Pagoda itself, the 8th floor, and the 9th floor. The Prism Pagoda's intelligence had not fully recovered, so it was not particularly dangerous. The 8th floor, on the other hand, had already woken up. Moreover, it was restless, but its intentions were unclear. What did it want? Did it want the pagoda? If it wanted the pagoda, with its current strength, it should be able to come out and leave with this broken pagoda. After all, the reason they were suppressed was because each floor not only had seals, but there were also Dao laws. And now, the Dao laws of the 8th floor were obviously not there. A simple seal would not be able to suppress it. Yet the 8th floor did not come out and stayed in the pagoda. It must have a plan. Hearing the 8th floor's reply, Yi Xian smiled. Actually, Senior can leave, right? The voice laughed, indeed. Yi Xian nodded. Junior will not beat around the bush, Senior. Since Senior can leave, why not? Is it because of yourself? Or is there something Senior wants? The voice said, both. Both. Yi Xian smiled. What does Senior want? The 8th floor said, this pagoda. This pagoda. The other party did not hide it at all. Yi Xian smiled. With Senior's strength, taking this pagoda should not be difficult, right? The 8th floor said, yes. Killing you and the purple-clothed woman beside you is as easy as flipping my hand. Straightforward. Yi Xian was confused. Then why doesn't Senior do anything? After a moment of silence, the 8th floor said, Sai, you have too many backers. Killing you and taking this pagoda is easy, but the revenge is too much for me. Yi Xian. The 8th floor said, I will tell you the truth. I am waiting for someone to kill you. He will kill you and take this pagoda. Then I will kill him. This way, I will not be affected by karma. Unfortunately, this person from the 4th dimension is a bit stupid. I am very disappointed. Hearing this, Yi Xian understood. Killing with a borrowed knife. The 8th floor was waiting for others to kill him. Then he would come and kill others. Obviously, the 8th person was afraid of the woman in a plain dress. Yi Xian asked, I presume the reason Senior did this is because of that woman in a plain dress? The 8th replied, You can say so. However, it's not entirely because of her. You're not simple yourself, and I don't want to be tainted by your karma. Yi Xian frowned. Me? Not simple? The 8th person replied, Yes. Yi Xian asked, What's not simple? The 8th replied, There's no point in telling you. Yi Xian didn't ask again. Anyway, he already got the answer. The guy in front of him would not kill him first. That was enough. If he was killed by someone else, the other party would avenge him. When he thought about it this way, he suddenly realized that it wasn't a bad thing. Yi Xian turned to leave. As if he had thought of something, he asked, Senior, has the 9th floor awakened as well? The 8th person replied, I don't know. I don't know. Yi Xian nodded slightly and left quickly. Yi Xian arrived at the 1st floor and looked up. At this moment, Venerable Sword was still sitting in front of the 2 swords. Ever since Venerable Sword had arrived, he had been sitting in front of the 2 swords, as if he was comprehending something. Yi Xian knew that these 2 swords might have enlightened Venerable Sword. If this continued, Venerable Sword's attainments in Sword Dao might improve greatly. If Venerable Sword improved, it would naturally be a good thing for Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and left the prison pagoda. In the following days, apart from cultivating every day, Yi Xian spent the rest of his time accompanying Yi Ling. This period of time was also the most peaceful for the siblings, since they came to the black-yellow great world. Now, everyone's target was Venerable Sword. No one cared about Yi Xian anymore. Even Temple had disappeared from the black-yellow great world. Now the black-yellow great world could be said to have been unified. King Yi, any expert in the black-yellow great world would respectfully address Yi Xian as King Yi when they saw him. It should be known that the entire black-yellow great world would tremble when Yi Xian stomped his feet. On this day, Yi Xian arrived in the sky, which was once Temple. Of course, it was only one of Temple's strongholds in the black-yellow great world. This piece of land was still empty. Yi Xian did not let anyone occupy this territory. The main reason was that there were too many people who coveted this territory. This was because there was origin purple chi here. This was very useful for cultivators. At this moment, the great elder of the Dao sect suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. He cupped his fists at Yi Xian. King Yi. Yi Xian said softly, I heard that your Dao sect has been eyeing this place for a long time. The great elder said in a low voice, King Yi, this place is extremely important to my Dao sect. Please, King Yi. Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at the great elder. It's extremely important to your Dao sect. Should I give it to you? The great elder hesitated and then said, King Yi, this place is really important to my Dao sect. If King Yi is willing to part with it, my Dao sect will definitely. Yi Xian interrupted the great elder again. In the future, why didn't your Dao sect come out when I fought with Temple? It's understandable that you didn't come out to help. After all, you don't owe me anything. However, after we won, your Dao sect wants to share the spoils of war. Isn't this a little shameless? The great elder's face was a little ugly. He was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly attacked. Chi! The great elder's arms were directly cut off. Blood spurted out. The great elder was shocked. He hadn't expected Yi Xian to suddenly attack. Yi Xian looked behind the great elder. Dao sect, listen up. I don't want to waste my breath with you. This Sky Dome land belongs to me, Yi Xian. Don't even think about it. Otherwise, I'll personally go to your Dao sect. At that time, don't blame me for turning against you. A middle-aged man walked out from behind the great elder. This person was the Dao sect's sect master. The Dao sect's sect master looked at Yi Xian. King Yi. Yi Xian suddenly said, Scram. Hearing this, the Dao sect's sect master's face instantly turned gloomy. He didn't give me any face at all. The Dao sect's sect master glanced at Yi Xian. He didn't say anything else and turned to leave. The great elder hurriedly followed after him. Yi Xian suddenly said, Pass down my order. Secretly monitor the Dao sect. If there's anything unusual, kill them first and report later. Yes, a voice quietly rang out in the dark. In the current black-yellow great world, there was an army jointly formed by all the major forces. It was the Northern Army. This army consisted of powerful beings from the northern region, powerful beings from the Xianyuan family, and powerful beings from the Xianhuang world. In any case, it was formed by the various major forces, and the purpose of it was to deal with any sudden incidents. However, this army usually only listened to one person. That person was Yi Xian. The strength of this army could be said to be the strongest in the black-yellow great world, because they were the top powerhouses from all the major forces. At this time, Qiao Tian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. When he saw Qiao Tian Yi Xian was slightly stunned. Then he said in surprise, You have reached the Earth's celestial stage? Qiao Tian nodded. Surprised? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Very. He originally wanted to wait for Xiaoling to refine the Earth's celestial pill and give it to Qiao Tian He didn't expect that Qiao Tian would reach the Earth's celestial stage directly. Yi Xian asked, Is it because of the fountain of life? Qiao Tian said, Not exactly. However, the fountain of life occupies 80% of the Earth's celestial stage, and the remaining 20% is in this place. I absorbed a lot of origin chi in this place. With the help of the fountain of life, I reached the Earth's celestial stage directly. Of course, the most important reason is that the woman broke the restrictive spell of the black-yellow great world with a single sword strike. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for me to reach the Earth's celestial stage even with these two things. Yi Xian said with a smile. Anyway, congratulations. But your speed of improvement is really terrifying. Qiao Tian said softly, You don't know how long I've been stuck in this stage. It's been too long. Yi Xian nodded slightly. You've been accumulating for a long time. Qiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. What's your next plan? Yi Xian said with a smile. I haven't thought about it yet. Qiao Tian looked around and said, Besides the Dao sect, there's basically no other unstable factors in the black-yellow great world now. The stage here is too small, and it's not suitable for you. Yi Xian fell silent. Qiao Tian looked at Yi Xian and said, Don't think about living a peaceful life. Your life is destined to be turbulent. If I'm not wrong, Xiaota is back in your hands, right? Yi Xian looked at Qiao Tian. You. At this moment, he was really shocked because he hadn't expected that Qiao Tian would know that the Prism Pagoda was back in his hands. Qiao Tian said indifferently, No one can find Sword Venerable, and the last place he disappeared was here. If I'm not wrong, Sword Venerable should be here, or he's dead. She paused for a moment and said, Is he dead? Yi Xian shook his head. No. Qiao Tian nodded. No matter what, this matter is quite complicated now. You must be careful. Don't let anyone know that Sword Venerable is here. Otherwise, everyone's attention will be focused on the northern region once more. Yi Xian said with a smile. Of course I know that. Xiao Tian'er nodded. Also be careful of the Divine Hall. They aren't stupid. If I'm not wrong, Yuan Xiaodao might have guessed that Sword Venerable is in the northern region. You'd better have a plan to deal with it, otherwise, you might suffer a huge loss. Yuan Xiaodao. Yi Xian nodded. This woman wasn't simple at all. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly looked up and saw a woman walking over slowly from not too far away. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw the woman. It was none other than Yuan Xiaodao. She's here again. Yi Xian's face instantly sank. Chapter 786. Needless to say, Yi Xian was quite annoyed at this moment. This Yuan Xiaodao is going against me. There's no end to it. Yuan Xiaodao walked in front of Yi Xian and sized up Yi Xian with a smile. What, are you not happy to see me? Yi Xian said indifferently. Should I be happy? Yuan Xiaodao covered her mouth and laughed. Yi Xian, no. I have to respectfully call you King Yi now. King Yi, this is your fault. No matter what, we are good friends, you. Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand. Miss Yuan, if you have something to say, then say it. I really have no interest in getting entangled with you. Yuan Xiaodao didn't get angry and said with a smile. King Yi, just tell me the truth. Yi Xian slightly frowned. Tell me what? Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian. That Sword Venerable didn't leave the northern region, right? Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. It seems that Miss Yuan still doesn't believe me. If you don't believe me, you can go search the northern region yourself. Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian said with a smile. Miss Yuan, think about it. With Senior Sword Venerable's strength, if he wants to leave, who can stop him? Moreover, what reason does he have to stay here? Yuan Xiaodao said with a smile. I have to ask you. Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. All right. Miss Yuan, Senior Sword Venerable is here. Really? Not only is he here, but the World Prism Pagoda has also returned to my hands. Are you satisfied now? Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian said with a smile. And then? Miss Yuan, are you going to attack me like before? Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian for a moment and said, Yi Xian, do you really think that you can play with all the experts in the palm of your hand? Yi Xian said with a smile. Miss Yuan, I won't talk nonsense with you. Goodbye. With that, he turned around and left with Xiao Tian'er. He didn't want to waste his breath on this woman. Yuan Xiaodao stared at Yi Xian's back and fell into deep thought. Where was the Sword Venerable? Now almost countless experts were thinking about this question. On the other hand, Yuan Xiaodao felt that the Sword Exalt was definitely in the north. Moreover, it was very likely that the World Prism Pagoda had returned to Yi Xian's hands. Of course, this was only her intuition. She had no proof. Yi Xian. Yuan Xiaodao looked coldly into the distance. She was really annoyed with this swordsman. After a short moment, Yuan Xiaodao glanced at the sky, and then he turned around and left. In the sky, a divine sense was locked onto her. It was Alian. With Alian around, it would be extremely difficult for her to kill Yi Xian. In the sky, Alian looked at Yuan Xiaodao's back in silence. No one knew what she was thinking. Yi Xian returned to the king's hall. After giving some instructions to everyone, he got up and left the north. Yi Xian knew very well that many people might still be suspicious of him. He had to leave. Otherwise, the attention of Yuan Xiaodao and the others would always be on the black-yellow great world. Attract attention. Of course, it wasn't just to attract attention. He also wanted to temper himself. He was now in the unknown realm, and his physical body had reached the peak of the creation realm. Even if he encountered Yuan Xiaodao, he would be able to fight. However, he didn't have much confidence in defeating him. Moreover, he had to add all kinds of external items. After all, he was a god. Moreover, he hadn't seen Yuan Xiaodao's true strength since he came into contact with him. It was still a mystery how strong Yuan Xiaodao really was. As Yi Xian left the northern region, some strong people hiding in the dark in the northern region also left one after another. Obviously, there were many people who suspected that the Sword Venerable was still in the north. After Yi Xian left the north, he followed Alian, because Alian said she would bring him to one last place. In the starry sky, Yi Xian flew on his sword with Lian by his side. Yi Xian glanced behind him. He could already sense some obscure auras. Obviously, these people were here to follow him. Yi Xian looked at Lian. She said softly, "Let them follow us." Yi Xian nodded and looked at Lian. "Senior Lian, where are we going?" Lian smiled. "A place that no one has been to for a long time. When we get there, it will be time for us to part ways." "They're leaving." Yi Xian thought about it. "Thank you for all this time, Senior Lian." Lian smiled and looked at Yi Xian. "When the time comes, you'll have to face everything yourself. Are you ready?" Yi Xian nodded. "I'm ready." He knew that he couldn't always rely on others. Lian nodded and looked at the end of the starry sky. "You're growing fast, but that doesn't mean you're safe. On the contrary, the faster you grow, the more danger you'll be in. That's because you'll have to interact with more and stronger people." Yi Xian nodded. "I know." Lian looked at Yi Xian. "You don't know. You don't know your current situation. Think about it. The plain-dressed woman is so powerful, but she can't solve your crisis. Do you know why?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't know." Lian said softly. "I don't know either." Yi Xian was speechless. Lian looked at the end of the starry sky. "Look at this starry sky. If we keep going forward, even if we die, we won't reach the end. There are too many unknowns in this vast universe. The plain-dressed woman is invincible. But who can guarantee that there's no one stronger than her in this universe? Just look at the person who created Xiao Ta in the fifth dimension. What kind of genius was he? Other than him, what kind of power did the strongest people in the fifth dimension have? Everything is unknown." Yi Xian shook his head. He didn't want to think about this, because there was no point in thinking about it. What's coming will come. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Lian. "Miss Lian, let's go." Lian nodded. "Let's go." Then she turned and left. The three of them sped up. Before long, the three of them arrived at an unknown stellar field. Before arriving at this stellar field, they had passed through about a dozen stellar field black holes. Not only that, but they also encountered a few black hole storms. His heart palpitated at the thought of those black hole storms. It was too terrifying. Even an Earth immortal body couldn't withstand that kind of power. Fortunately, he had these two girls with him, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to reach this starfield. And now, the people who followed behind them had almost all disappeared. He didn't know if there were still people following them. Suddenly, Lian pointed into the distance. "Over there." Yi Xian looked into the distance and saw a black hall floating in the depths of the starfield. The hall was dark and eerie. Above the hall's door there were two blood-red words, Netherworld. Yi Xian frowned. Netherworld Hall? P.S. Let me ask everyone, has anyone encountered this kind of thing before? Sometimes, something that has just happened feels like you've experienced it before. That kind of feeling of déjà vu is a little strange. Chapter 787. Nether Palace. Yi Xian looked at the black palace in the distance and asked, "The Netherworld Palace?" Lian nodded. "Nether Palace." Yi Xian asked again, "What faction?" Lian smiled and didn't speak. Yuan Xiaodao whispered, "I didn't expect such a powerful faction to exist in such a remote place." Lian looked at Yuan Xiaodao and smiled. "Powerful? Why do you say so?" Yuan Xiaodao looked at the black palace in the distance and said softly, "Danger! Danger!" At this moment her expression was somewhat solemn. There were things that could make her feel danger in the four-dimensional universe, but they were few and far between. And now she felt danger. Clearly, this wasn't an ordinary faction. Lian smiled. "Let's go take a look." After saying that, she walked into the distance. Yi Xian hurried to follow him. Yuan Xiaodao hesitated for a moment then followed. It didn't take long for the three of them to arrive before the Nether Palace. The palace was empty and cold. Yi Xian looked at Lian, and Lian pushed the door open. Just as the door opened, a gust of cold wind blew in. The three of them walked into the main hall. The main hall was also empty. In front of the three of them, there were 11 statues of women. Looking at the 11 female statues, Elaine's eyes suddenly became a little dazed. "Long time no see." looking at the 11 female statues. Yi Xian was about to ask when Alian suddenly walked up to the third statue on the left. Looking at the statue in front of her, Alian's eyes suddenly became misty. Third sister. Third sister? Yi Xian looked at Alian and asked, Senior Alian, this is? Alian said, bow to them. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then bowed to the statues. Alian nodded and looked at the statues. Finally, she looked at Yi Xian. Activate your bloodline. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. As he spoke, he directly activated his bloodline. Soon, a red glow suddenly appeared around his body. The power of bloodline. Sensing Yi Xian's bloodline power, Yuan Xiaodao slightly frowned. This bloodline. Alian glanced at Yuan Xiaodao and didn't say anything. At this moment, Yi Xian's hair began to slowly turn blood red. Not only that, but his entire body also emitted an extremely powerful killing intent and vicious aura. Yuan Xiaodao's frown deepened when he saw this. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior Alian, I can't suppress this bloodline power for much longer. The reason why he didn't dare to rashly activate this bloodline power was because he couldn't completely control it. Once this bloodline power was unleashed, even he would be afraid. Alian was about to speak when a statue nearby suddenly opened its eyes, and then a woman walked out of it. The woman was wearing linen clothes and a cotton skirt. She was barefooted. The woman looked directly at Yi Xian and frowned slightly. Ha! At this moment, she suddenly looked at Alian on her right. A trace of surprise flashed across her eyes. You! Alian smiled. Long time no see. The woman nodded. Long time no see. Saying that, she looked at Yuan Xiaodao, who was not far away. The latter's expression changed, and he became extremely cautious. Alian smiled. She's an enemy. Hearing that, the woman squinted her eyes. In the next moment, Yuan Xiaodao's expression changed drastically, because the vitality in her body was disappearing at an alarming rate. Not only that, but a dense deathly aura was also emitting from her body. Yuan Xiaodao suddenly drew his blade and slashed. Qi! A ray of blade radiance tore through the sky. The blade was faintly discernible, as if it didn't exist, but everyone could feel it. However, before the blade radiance could even get close to the woman, it suddenly disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the space around Yuan Xiaodao suddenly became illusory. Yuan Xiaodao's expression changed drastically. Without any hesitation, she flashed backward and appeared in the starry sky thousands of meters away. The woman raised her right hand slightly and was about to attack when Alian suddenly smiled. Forget it. The woman looked at Alian. Alian smiled. Let him deal with it himself. The woman looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said seriously, I don't think we can just let it go like this. It's better to kill him. Alian laughed heartily. Keep dreaming. Saying that, she looked at the woman. I came to you this time to ask you to mediate with him. He's still a little weak right now. The woman looked at Yi Xian. She sized up Yi Xian and nodded. Weak. Yi Xian was speechless. He didn't dare to retort because from the woman's attack, he was indeed a little weak. At this moment, Alian said solemnly, He's the person that crazy woman is looking for. Crazy woman. Hearing that, the woman frowned. Her. Alian nodded. Yes. This matter is a little complicated. The woman looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and asked, Who's that crazy woman? Alian smiled. The woman in the plain dress. Yi Xian's face froze. In the eyes of Alian and the others, the woman in the plain dress is a crazy woman? He hesitated for a moment and said, She's actually quite a good person. Hearing that, the woman's expression became slightly strange. Alian laughed. Quite a good person. That's right. She's quite nice to you. But she's not nice to others. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? I think she's quite easy to get along with. Alian sighed. She's given all her gentleness and good temper to you. Of course you think she's easy to get along with. Yi Xian was speechless. Alian looked at the woman. The woman said, She's already found him. Why didn't she teach him herself? Alian shook her head and said, This guy isn't simple. His identity is too special. Not only does he have karma from the 4th dimension, he also has karma from the 5th dimension. From the looks of it, He might be related to the fifth dimension. That woman is currently fighting against the fifth dimension and blocking karma for him. The woman frowned. With her strength, she can enter the fifth dimension. Alian glanced at Yixian. It's all because of him. The fifth dimension won't let her enter. If she tries to force her way in, they'll kill her at all costs. That's why she doesn't dare to force her way in. But she's also restraining the fifth dimension to prevent its karma from reaching the fourth dimension. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment and said, "Only this fellow can make this woman compromise." However, with that woman's temper, once she enters the fifth dimension in the future, I'm afraid that those fellows from the fifth dimension will suffer a fate worse than death. The woman nodded. He's not to be trifled with. Alian smiled and said, "This guy is a little weak now, and he and that crazy woman are letting him grow freely, basically letting him grow. As for this guy, he's currently walking a little crooked, playing with all sorts of fancy things every day. This time, I've come to find you in hopes that you can help him understand the various laws of this world, so that he can better understand this world and prevent him from walking a crooked path." The woman looked at Yixian. "You're luckier." Yixian was confused. Just as he was about to ask, the woman suddenly said, "Can you beat that woman?" Yixian was startled, but he quickly understood who the woman was talking about. It was Yuan Xiaodao. Yixian thought for a while and said, "If I use some external objects, I might be able to fight." The woman asked, "What external objects?" Yixian took out his immortal slaying sword Gourd and executing heaven sword. This. The woman's gaze fell on the executing heaven sword. "You met her." "Who?" Yixian was puzzled. "A woman with a wine gourd hanging on her waist." The woman said, "The sword martial sect's ancestral master." Yixian nodded. "Yes. She said she's coming to find me, but she's not here yet." The woman looked at Alian. Alian said softly, "She might not be in this universe right now. Otherwise, she would definitely come. But since her doppelganger saw her, her main body should be here as well." The woman nodded. She looked at Yixian. "What do you want to learn?" Yixian said hurriedly, "I want to learn both." The woman in the cloth dress said softly, "This universe is made up of countless substances and various types of energy. The laws are like a thread that affects these substances and various types of energy, and it can even change these substances and energy. But there are different substances and energies in this world. Therefore, the laws are also different. Some laws can only change relative substances and energies. Do you understand me?" Yixian blinked. I don't understand." The woman suddenly opened her palm. In an instant, Yixian's expression changed drastically. He found that something was flowing out of his body quickly. Yixian quickly retreated. "This," the woman said, "the energy of life and the energy of death. To put it simply, it's yin and yang. Yin represents death, and yang represents life. Earlier, I utilized the energy of the laws to change your yin and yang. If this continues, then your yin and yang will be reversed, and then you'll die. Understand?" Yixian quickly nodded. I understand." At that moment, he really felt that he was going to die. He had never been so close to death before. At this moment, he finally understood why Yuan Xiaodao was so afraid. The woman looked at Yixian. "This is the power of the law. It can change some substances and energies in this world. There are also some laws that can strengthen some substances and energies. As a swordsman, if you can understand these laws and these substances and energies, you will be able to break all laws with one sword." As she said that, she opened her palm. In an instant, the space around Yixian became illusory. Not only that, but he suddenly felt that there was a strange airflow around him. Death Qi. But at this moment, the Death Qi turned into Life Qi. Chapter 788. The Qi of Life and the Qi of Death. It was the first time Yixian felt this power so clearly. Matter, energy. He didn't really understand these two terms. But after the woman's explanation, he wasn't so naive anymore. Only by understanding the structure and essence of this universe, and combining it with his own sword Dao, would he be able to achieve what the woman in the cloth dress had said. He would be able to break all techniques with a single sword. Not only did he have to understand his own sword Tao, but he also had to understand all things in the universe. Meanwhile, the woman in a cloth dress said, "The path of cultivation isn't just about cultivating yourself. It's about understanding the world as well." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "What should I do?" The woman asked, "What do you think you should do?" Yi Xian kept quiet. Yi Xian found a problem at this moment. That was, his strength was different from the strength of these people in front of him. No, he couldn't be said to be strong. These people weren't just cultivating themselves. They were also comprehending the universe. They had a thorough understanding of the nature of the universe. Individuals, the universe. At the thought of this, Yi Xian suddenly understood. Yi Xian looked at the woman in the cotton dress. "I kind of got it." The woman in the cloth dress nodded slightly. "Observe the universe with yourself, understand the universe, control the universe, and finally destroy the universe." Destroy the universe? Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, Alian suddenly said, "She didn't mean destroying the universe. Of course, there was a crazy woman who did it in the past." Then she looked at Yi Xian. After a pause, she added, "Do you know what level Yuan Xiaodao is at?" Yi Xian said, "Above the Earth Immortal level." Alian smiled. "What's above the Earth Immortal level?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't know," Alian said softly. "Above the Earth Immortal is the fate state. Simply put, it's the knowing destiny state. Such experts have a certain understanding of the universe itself. They can sense the destiny of heaven and man. Such people are the real starters. Right now, you don't know the heavens and fate. Although you have the support of external items, you still have no chance of winning against a life realm expert." Yi Xian asked, "Senior Alian, what is above the fate state?" Alian smiled. Breaking fate with one's heart, seeking Tao." Yi Xian asked again, "What about above that?" Alian shook her head. "What does it have to do with you?" Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. "I'm just a little curious." Alian said, "You might be in the unknown realm, but you need to understand where you are in this universe. You won't feel any pressure facing ordinary people. Even if it's Yuan Xiaodao, you still have a chance of winning. However, you have to understand that they are not the top powerhouses of this universe. You are still very, very weak compared to the top powerhouses of this universe. In addition to this universe, there is also a fifth-dimensional universe. The experts in that universe are definitely stronger than the ones here. Do you understand?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I understand." He still felt bitter in his heart. Fifth dimension, fourth dimension, both against him. Yi Xian. What kind of sin did he commit in his previous life? Alian smiled. "Your current realm is unknown. Your physique is at great perfection, and your sword Tao is at bright state. Your overall strength isn't weak, but you can't slack off. The path of Tao E is like rowing a boat against the current. If you don't move forward, you will fall behind. Moreover, this path is endless. Don't be complacent just because you have a little achievement, understand?" Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Complacent. He wouldn't be complacent because there were still many people who could kill him, Yi Xian. Under such circumstances, what right did Yi Xian have to be complacent? Alian looked at Yi Xian. "You stay here and learn from her. Ask her if there's anything you don't understand. You must learn well. Otherwise, if you meet a law master in the future, you won't even be able to fight back." "Okay," Yi Xian replied seriously. He was very clear that this was an opportunity for him. After all, not everyone was willing to teach an expert of this level. Naturally, he would cherish this opportunity. Alian turned and left. "Senior Alian, are you leaving now?" Yi Xian quickly asked. "Not for now. I'll leave after you're done." Alian smiled. "All right." Yi Xian nodded. Alian looked at the girl in cotton skirt. "Teach her well. Be ruthless." The girl in cotton skirt nodded. "All right." Yi Xian was speechless. Alian smiled and turned to leave. Outside, after Alian came out, she saw Yuan Xiaodao. At this moment, Yuan Xiaodao was staring at her. Alian smiled. "Are you angry, Miss Yuan?" "Who is she?" Yuan Xiaodao said in a deep voice. Alian asked softly, "Miss Yuan, how much do you know about this universe? Or rather, How much does the Pantheon know about this universe? Yuan Xiaodao stared at Alian silently. Alian smiled. This universe is huge and there are many experts, isn't that so? Yuan Xiaodao was expressionless. Are you trying to scare me? Alian laughed. Why would I scare you? Miss Yuan, I just want to ask you. Is there any meaning in targeting Yi Xian? You've always been afraid of him growing up and becoming a threat to you. Why don't you think about it the other way around? What if you become friends with him? If you become friends with him, the faster he grows, the more monstrous he becomes. It's not a bad thing for you, right? Yuan Xiaodao was silent. Alian continued. As for the treasure of the fifth dimension, Miss Yuan, do you still not understand? It's not something an ordinary person can possess. You should know that taking something that doesn't belong to you will kill you. Yuan Xiaodao was silent for a moment before saying, That's our chance. Alian smiled. Do you really think you can go to the fifth dimension with that pagoda? Yuan Xiaodao looked at Alian. Why? Alian smiled. Let me tell you the truth. Even if you get the pagoda, you won't be able to enter the fifth dimension. You need to understand the relationship between the fourth and fifth dimensions. This is the relationship between the weak and the strong. Even if you use the pagoda to enter the fifth dimension, you'll just be throwing your life away. Saying that, she shook her head. If you can't even understand the fourth dimension, why go to the fifth dimension? To get beaten up? To get beaten up? Yuan Xiaodao was silent. Alian looked at Yuan Xiaodao. You're a smart person, so you should understand what I'm saying. Of course, if you still want the pagoda and want to target him, then go ahead. In any case, no matter what happens to him, those who target him will die. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Alian. That plain-dressed woman? Alian smiled. It's not just the plain-dressed woman. Hearing that, Yuan Xiaodao narrowed his eyes. Not just her. Alian laughed. I won't talk to you anymore. You decide what to do. Saying that, she turned and left. On the spot, Yuan Xiaodao was silent. Actually, during this period of time, especially after coming into contact with Yi Xian, she was also somewhat shaken. Her heart to kill Yi Xian was shaken. If she could kill him, she wouldn't hesitate to do so. But the problem was Yi Xian easy to kill? During this period of time, she had personally witnessed Yi Xian's growth. This growth speed could no longer be described with words. This was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the people behind Yi Xian were not simple. She could already sense that there was a huge group behind Yi Xian. Regarding this group, not only did she know nothing, but even the temple also knew nothing. What kind of group was this? Could the temple really fight against them? Could they? Yuan Xiaodao was somewhat at a loss. Moreover, just like what the purple-robed woman had said, even if they obtained the fifth-dimensional treasure, would the shrine be able to keep it? Or could the temple use the treasure to enter the fifth dimension to fight against the fifth dimension? She was very clear that in this world, the strong were respected. If the temple was too weak, even if they entered the fifth dimension, their lives would be worse than dogs. Because they did not have the strength. Why must they go to the fifth dimension? Or rather, why could they not use their own strength to go to the fifth dimension, and instead use the shortcut method? Yuan Xiaodao suddenly felt somewhat at a loss. At this moment, the saber at her waist suddenly trembled. Roughly 15 minutes later, Yuan Xiaodao's eyes were no longer at a loss, only determination. Yuan Xiaodao coldly looked at the distant starry sky. Why should I, Yuan Xiaodao, take a shortcut? After saying that, she suddenly drew her saber and slashed. Chi! The distant starry sky was suddenly torn apart. Not only was it torn, but it also became illusory. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly swept out from Yuan Xiaodao's body. At this moment, the endless starry sky was filled with Yuan Xiaodao's saber intent. This saber intent seemed to want to cut the endless starry sky. It was extremely shocking. Break! Saber Dao had broken through. In the distance, in front of the Nether Palace, Alian glanced in Yuan Xiaodao's direction and softly said, "A genius!" She did not expect that her words would allow Yuan Xiaodao to break through to the Saber Dao realm. Although the Bright Realm was only one level away from the Breakthrough Realm, there was a world of difference between them. Towards the end, the gap between each level was very, very large. Now that Yuan Xiaodao's saber intent had broken through to the breakthrough realm, if she fought with Yi Xian, even if Yi Xian used external items, he would not have any chance of winning. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Alian's mind. Kill her? After a moment of silence, Alian said, wait for now. At this moment, Yuan Xiaodao suddenly appeared in front of her. Alian lightly smiled. Congratulations. Yuan Xiaodao glanced at the Nether Palace and indifferently said, I will not be his enemy anymore, nor will I cause trouble for him. However, I cannot guarantee that the temple will give up. Alian smiled. It's fine. If the temple sends other experts, he will naturally deal with them. Yuan Xiaodao lightly nodded. No matter what, thank you for what you said. After saying that, she glanced at the Nether Palace and was about to leave. At this moment, a powerful sword intent suddenly spread out from the Nether Palace. Sword intent. 2 sword intents. Alian looked at the Nether Palace with a flicker of surprise in her eyes. P.S. One more thing. Sometimes, when you look in the mirror, you feel that you look okay. But when you take a picture, you look extremely ugly. Chapter 789. Sword Intent. 2 completely different types of sword intent. Alian looked towards the Nether Hall. At this moment, Yi Xian was still comprehending. Yuan Xiaodao was silent. She knew that Yi Xian was about to advance again. He was a cheater. Life was all about cheating. Yuan Xiaodao shook his head. After giving up on targeting Yi Xian, she suddenly felt relaxed. Because no matter how monstrous Yi Xian was, it had nothing to do with her anymore. Let it go. At this moment, she finally understood that many times, letting go of something could lead to a different life. There were many times when one shouldn't be too stubborn in life. After a moment of silence, Yuan Xiaodao turned around and was about to leave. However, he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He wanted to see the changes in Yi Xian. In the Nether Hall, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground with 2 types of sword intent revolving around him. Sword intent. Good and evil sword intent. What was good and evil? He had many comprehensions in the past, but the path of good and evil was really complicated. To put it simply, good and evil were the right and wrong of this world. Who could say for sure whether it was right or wrong? Everyone had a ruler in their heart that could measure right and wrong. However, right and wrong in this world weren't absolute. As for Yi Xian's good and evil sword intent, he couldn't see through the good and evil of this world. The only thing he could do was to remain true to himself, and not do anything that went against his heart. He would not do anything that was against his conscience. As for the rest, he couldn't care less. Because he, Yi Xian, wasn't a saint. At this moment, the woman walked out of the hall. When he saw the woman, Yuan Xiaodao's expression immediately became vigilant. He was extremely fearful of this woman, even though it wasn't her main body, but a clone. The woman glanced at Yuan Xiaodao before turning to Alian. Why are you here? Alian smiled. To do something? The woman asked. Because of him? Alian shook her head. Not exactly. There are some things that I have to deal with. The woman nodded. Where is that woman now? Alian smiled. The woman in plain dress? The woman nodded. Alian whispered. I do not know the exact location. The woman in the cotton dress fell silent. Actually, with her strength, she should have been able to go to the 5th dimension, but for that guy inside, she actually stayed here. This is not a good thing. The woman in the cotton dress nodded. This world could no longer contain that woman. In particular, this woman had a particularly bad temper. Her presence here was too dangerous for the universe. Because if she went crazy, no one would be able to control her. The woman glanced at the boundless starry sky in the distance and said softly, It's still that universe, but it's not the universe I'm familiar with. Alian smiled. You're lucky that you met an acquaintance like me. Otherwise, it would be even more boring for you to come out. The woman nodded slightly. I do miss that little fellow and that little girl. Alian laughed. I miss them too. Ever since they went to Lian Shuang's hometown, they've become more mischievous. A trace of a smile appeared on the woman's face when she heard this. Those 2 little fellows were indeed fun to play with. At this moment, the 3 women looked towards the Netherworld Palace at the same time. A man walked out from there. It was Yi Xian. Around Yi Xian, there were one black and one white sword essences circling him. Good and evil sword essences. The woman in the cotton dress sized up Yi Xian and said softly, "How is it?" Yi Xian smiled. "It feels great." The woman nodded slightly. "Congratulations, your sword heart has become clearer." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Comprehension. This time, his greatest gain was not his understanding of the laws, but his understanding of his sword Tao. The essence of sword Tao. While comprehending the laws and the essence of this world, he suddenly thought of the essence of sword Tao. What was the essence of sword Tao? It was actually the sword. A pure sword. The reason why there were countless sword Taos in this world was because of humans. Every human could give life to a sword and give them different sword Taos. There were thousands of sword Taos because there were thousands of humans. The essence of the sword was actually the sword. It did not have many fancy things, it only had them because of humans. They were whatever humans gave them. The essence of sword Tao was the sword. He should not be thinking about the sword, he should be thinking about himself. Because he was the ultimate essence of sword Tao. The human was the core. After thinking this through, he realized that his state of mind and sword essence had undergone great changes, especially his sword essence. His sword essence now felt like it had a life of its own. Taking a look at Yi Xian, Elaine nodded slightly. "I don't think you will be in any danger if you are no match for someone as strong as Miss Yuan." Yi Xian looked at Yuan Xiaodao and smiled. "Miss Yuan, how about a spar?" Miss Yuan raised her eyebrows. "That's what I was thinking." Then she looked at the two women. "You don't mind, right?" Alian smiled. "Of course. But please go easy on me." Yi Xian suddenly said, "Senior Alian, I'm not that weak." Alian looked at Yuan Xiaodao and said, "Then go hard. Just don't kill him." Yi Xian was speechless. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Yi Xian and said, "Make your move." Yi Xian didn't waste any time and stabbed out with his sword. He did not use any xianqi or sword techniques. It was just a simple sword technique. Alian shook her head and smiled when she saw Yi Xian attack. She knew why Yi Xian dared to challenge Yuan Xiaodao. The spar he was talking about didn't use any xianqi. It was just a simple spar of basic skills. How could Yuan Xiaodao not know what Yi Xian meant? She didn't use any xianqi either. She just used her fingers to clamp down on Yi Xian's sword. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly let go of his sword and charged forward. But before he could hit Yuan Xiaodao, he felt a sharp pain in his abdomen and was pushed back dozens of meters. Yi Xian was stunned when he stopped. Yuan Xiaodao held the sword in his hand and said indifferently, "You want to compete with me in basic skills? What do you have to compete with me? I've been cultivating for thousands of years. How long have you been cultivating? If it wasn't for your treasures, you would be the younger brother of the younger brothers. Understand?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "Don't be arrogant. Let's continue." Yuan Xiaodao hooked her finger. "Come." With a leap, Yi Xian appeared right in front of Yuan Xiaodao. At this moment, Yuan Xiaodao suddenly disappeared. His speed was extremely fast. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He turned around and threw a punch. Boom! As soon as he punched, he was pushed back dozens of meters. But before he could stop, Yuan Xiaodao appeared in front of him again. In the next moment, Yi Xian felt his vision blur, and he instinctively raised his arms to block. Bang! Along with a muffled sound, Yi Xian was pushed back dozens of meters. Yuan Xiaodao didn't continue to attack. She just looked at Yi Xian, again? In the distance, Yi Xian pondered for a moment before he said, "Come." Yuan Xiaodao pointed with her fingers, and the sword in her hand flew to Yi Xian. Yi Xian picked up the sword and slowly closed his eyes. He didn't make a move. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "You're using silence to stop me? Let's give it a try." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly disappeared. She didn't use any xianqi or any divine ability, but her speed was still unbelievably fast. At this moment Yi Xian attacked. This sword looked ordinary, and it was even a little slow. However, it accurately stabbed Yuan Xiaodao's fingertip. Bang! Yuan Xiaodao was forced to a stop by Yi Xian's sword. Not only that, but the power on her fingertip was also dissipated by Yi Xian's sword. Yuan Xiaodao's eyes flashed with surprise. You have some skill. Continue. As soon as she finished speaking, her fingers suddenly trembled. Bang! The sword in Yi Xian's hand trembled violently, and a powerful force passed through the sword to his body. Bang! Yi Xian was forced to retreat. Yuan Xiaodao was about to chase after him. But at this moment, the sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly flew out. Yuan Xiaodao blocked it with her fingers. Bang! The sword was directly blocked. But at this moment, Yi Xian appeared in front of her like a ghost. Then a fist smashed towards her face. Yuan Xiaodao didn't dodge, and she also punched out. Bang! Yi Xian instantly retreated. In terms of strength, he was far inferior to Yuan Xiaodao. In the distance, Yi Xian stopped Xiaoli and shook his head. I can't beat her. Even if he didn't use profound qi, he still wouldn't be able to beat Yuan Xiaodao. Yuan Xiaodao's attainments in the martial Dao were much higher than his. Be it speed, strength, or battle awareness, there was a huge gap between him and Yuan Xiaodao. An expert like Yuan Xiaodao wasn't the kind that relied on strength. Yuan Xiaodao glanced at Yi Xian. You're not too bad yourself. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Miss Yuan is powerful, and I accept my loss wholeheartedly. A trace of surprise flashed in Yuan Xiaodao's eyes. This time, she didn't expect that Yi Xian would admit defeat so readily. At this moment, Alian suddenly said, Your foundation is very solid, but there's still a big gap between you and Miss Yuan. After all, she was able to come this far, so she definitely isn't weak. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to come this far. In the future, if you encounter other experts from the deity's Templar, don't be careless, understand? Yi Xian nodded. I understand. At this moment, Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at Yuan Xiaodao, who smiled. I wish you a happy time with the next deity. Goodbye. With that, she turned around and left. Yi Xian was stunned. Miss Yuan, you're not going to kill me? Yuan Xiaodao's voice came from afar. I'm not going to kill you. I already know who the next one is. Yi Xian, good luck to you, haha. It was a gloating laughter. Yi Xian looked at Alian puzzled. Senior Alian, what is she doing? After a moment of silence, Alian said, We're leaving too. Now. Yi Xian asked solemnly. Alian nodded. You'll have to walk the rest of the way by yourself. With that, she was about to leave, but at this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side. What a coincidence! Chapter 790. Alian and the woman were stunned when they heard that voice, and they turned around to look towards the distance. A woman was walking towards them. Yi Xian looked towards that direction as well. Meanwhile, Alian spoke abruptly. You can leave now. Yi Xian gazed at Alian, senior. Alian smiled. Let's go. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and nodded. Farewell, senior. As soon as he finished speaking, he bowed slightly to them, and then he vanished into the distance. At this moment, a woman walked in front of Alian, and the woman in the cotton dress. The woman smiled. It's him. Alian nodded, and then she glanced at the woman. What are you doing here? The corners of the woman's mouth curled up. I've come to get you. To get me. Alian lowered her head slightly. The woman chuckled. Let's go. Alian nodded. All right. As soon as she finished speaking, she gazed at the woman. I have to bid my farewells. The woman nodded slightly. We'll meet again in the future. Alian smiled. Of course. As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished into the distance with the woman. The woman glanced at the starry sky around her, and then she waved her right hand. A strand of mysterious energy enveloped this expanse of the starry sky. A short while passed before her figure gradually became ethereal, and it didn't take long for her to vanish completely. At the end of the distant starry sky, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. At this moment something occurred to him. How to get back? He remembered that the three of them had passed through over 10 enormous black holes on their way here, and Alian and Yuan Xiaodao were there to deal with them. But now both of them were gone. So how was he supposed to get back? Yi Xian's face turned slightly unsightly. He hesitated for a moment, and decided to go back. However, he noticed that the expanse of space had vanished when he turned around, and it was replaced by a boundless black hole. It's gone? Yi Xian was quite stunned. What's going on? He tried to enter, but he couldn't because the powerful force made him stop in his tracks. Yi Xian fell silent. He knew that Lian, or the woman, had definitely sealed off that area. They've really left. In the same place, Yi Xian was silent for a long time before he turned around and left. Now, he could only rely on himself to walk back. Not long after, Yi Xian arrived in front of a black hole. Looking at this black hole, Yi Xian's expression was rather solemn. Before he came here, he had personally experienced the terror of the black hole, especially the black hole storm inside the black hole. Even the body of an earthly immortal could be crushed into pieces. Yi Xian did not dare to be careless. A moment later, Yi Xian entered the black hole. He had to pass through it. As soon as he entered the black hole, a powerful force enveloped his entire body, and that force started to crazily tear at his body. Yi Xian hurriedly circulated his profound energy, and at the same time, his sword intent suddenly swept out from his body. As the sword intent protected his body, his entire body instantly felt relaxed, but he still didn't dare to be careless, because he hadn't entered the center of the black hole. About an hour later, Yi Xian finally arrived at the center of the black hole. When he arrived at this area, the strangling force around him became even more terrifying. Yi Xian gently waved his right hand, and the executing heaven sword suddenly flew out. The next moment, the executing heaven sword began to circle around him, and rays of sword radiance directly wrapped around him. The sword radiance protected his body. Only the executing heaven sword could withstand that force. With the protection of the executing heaven sword, Yi Xian suddenly felt much more relaxed, but he still didn't dare to be careless. After walking for about an hour, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed, because not far in front of him, there was a black tornado wreaking havoc. A black hole storm. Seeing this black hole storm, Yi Xian did not hesitate to turn around and run. It was definitely not something he could fight against, unless he used the immortal slaying sword gourd, or the sword of celestials. But he was a little flustered to fight in this black hole, because one mistake could lead to his death. Right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. A black shadow suddenly flashed in front of him. Yi Xian's expression changed dramatically. Without any hesitation, he directly wielded the executing heaven sword and slashed down. Pfft! A ray of sword radiance slashed down. Boom! A powerful force suddenly exploded in front of Yi Xian. In an instant, Yi Xian retreated rapidly, and the direction he was retreating in was the direction of the black hole storm. In front of him, the man in black was emitting a ball of flames, and a powerful force swept toward him like a volcanic eruption. Yi Xian did not dare to be careless. He directly took out the immortal slaying sword gourd. The next moment, the executing heaven sword entered the gourd. In the blink of an eye, a ray of sword radiance suddenly flew out from the gourd. Buzz! The sound of a sword suddenly resounded throughout the entire black hole. In front of Yi Xian, an explosion suddenly rang out. Then, the man in black instantly retreated thousands of feet, and wherever the executing heaven sword passed, everything turned into nothingness. Tens of thousands of feet away, the man in black had just stopped, and the flames around him disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian gazed at the man in black. With a wave of his right hand, the executing heaven sword flew back into the immortal slaying sword gourd. The man in black's eyes instantly narrowed when he saw this. Obviously, he was extremely fearful of Yi Xian's immortal slaying sword gourd and the executing heaven sword. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly as he gazed at the man in black. A moment later, the immortal slaying sword gourd trembled violently, and then the executing heaven sword suddenly flew out. Hiss! A ray of sword radiance tore through the air. The man in black suddenly pressed his palms together and took a step forward. 10,000 flames converge. As soon as he spoke, a wave of flames suddenly swept out from within him, and then a human face suddenly condensed within the flames. A moment later, he suddenly opened his mouth and swallowed Yi Xian's executing heaven sword. A moment of silence ensued. Bang! A ray of sword radiance suddenly slashed out from within the flames. The executing heaven sword was pointed straight at the mysterious man in black. However, the remaining waves of flames had still arrived in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, clenched his right hand tightly, and then smashed his fist forward. The fist of burial. This punch forcefully stopped the waves of flames in front of him. Meanwhile, the mysterious man in black retreated explosively for over 10 kilometers again. Moreover, his figure had become slightly illusory at this moment. Obviously, he was slightly unable to hold on after forcefully resisting the executing heaven sword 2 times. However, the black hole had already arrived over 1 kilometer behind Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yi Xian smashed his fist forward once more. Bang! The flames in front of him vanished instantly. Yi Xian raised his head and gazed at the mysterious man in black. He gestured with his right hand, and then a ray of sword radiance flew directly back into the immortal slaying sword gourd. Yi Xian gazed at the mysterious man in black. Do you want to continue? The mysterious man in black slowly clenched his right hand, and a ball of flames suddenly condensed. However, he did not dare to make a move. One more sword strike would be enough to greatly injure his vitality. However, he did not expect that Yi Xian could consecutively make 2 sword strikes. Looking at the current situation, he was afraid that he could make 2 more sword strikes. Who could withstand this? Yi Xian sized up the black-clothed man, and then said, "Your Excellency, have you come for the 5th-dimensional treasure, or for me, Yi Xian?" The man in black said, "The 5th-dimensional treasure." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Don't you know? The 5th-dimensional treasure has already fallen into the hands of Venerable Sword. If you want it, you can go find Venerable Sword. Why did you come to me?" The man in black looked at Yi Xian. "I received news that Venerable Sword is still in your northern territory. He has not left." Yi Xian smiled. "You believe me?" The man in black narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Think about it. What kind of person is Venerable Sword? Do you think I have the ability to make him stay? Moreover, what reason does he have to stay in the northern territory? Moreover, if I'm not wrong, the news you received was given to you by Temple, right?" The man in black stared at Yi Xian without saying anything. Yi Xian continued, "Don't you know my relationship with Temple? Think about it. If Venerable Sword is really in my northern territory, why doesn't he appear?" Saying this, he shook his head and smiled. "This Temple, they don't give up on killing me and keep framing me." The man in black was silent. Yi Xian glanced around and said with a smile, "I won't waste any more time with you. Do you want to make a move or leave? If you want to make a move, I'll call for help." Call for help. Hearing this, the man in black's expression changed slightly. He knew that there was a woman in purple behind Yi Xian. The reason why he made a move just now was because he saw that the woman in purple wasn't there. He wanted to catch Yi Xian off guard, but he underestimated Yi Xian's strength. Those 2 slashes had almost severed his body. If the woman in purple joined forces with Yi Xian. Thinking of this, the man in black had the intention to retreat. Yi Xian suddenly smiled. "Sir, I'll give you a free piece of news. Do you want to hear it?" The man in black looked at Yi Xian. "Speak." Yi Xian said, "When Venerable Sword Master left the northern region, people from the Divine Palace immediately came to the northern region. Then I told them the direction, and they went after him. At that time, there were 2 super strong people from the Divine Palace. One of them was even a god, Yuan Xiaodao. However, after about an hour, they suddenly returned to the northern territory and said that Venerable Sword had completely disappeared. Then, they insisted that Venerable Sword was still in the northern territory and hadn't left. Sir, don't you think this is very strange?" The man in black frowned. "You mean that Venerable Sword might have been killed by Temple? Impossible. Venerable Sword is very powerful. Even 2 gods might not be able to kill him." Yi Xian suddenly said, "What about the other 3? What about the other 4? Hearing this, the man in black's pupil shrank. "How is that possible?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Sir, you have to understand that this is a 5th-dimensional treasure. This is a 5th-dimensional treasure. Isn't it worth it for the Divine Palace to send so many gods?" Hearing this, the man in black fell silent. Yi Xian said again, "Sir, think about it. Between me and Temple, Who is more capable of killing venerable sword? Me or temple? Sir, think about it carefully. After a moment, the man in black said in a deep voice. You mean, temple killed venerable sword and then framed you? Yi Xian. P.S. Late update. Sorry, I slept for a few more minutes. Chapter 791. Inside the black hole, Yi Xian smiled. What do you think, senior? The mysterious man in black was silent for a moment, then asked, Is sword venerable really not in your northern region? Yi Xian said indifferently, Senior, I am a swordsman, and a swordsman of the bright state sword Dao. Do you think I would lie? You should know that we swordsmen pay attention to a clear conscience, and maintain our original heart. The mysterious man in black was silent for a moment, then turned around and left. He did not completely trust Yi Xian, but between Yi Xian and the temple, he was more willing to trust Yi Xian. As Yi Xian said, Yi Xian was a swordsman. Therefore, in his heart, Yi Xian should not lie. After all, he was a super swordsman. This kind of person was usually very arrogant. Why would he lie? This kind of person disdained to lie. After the mysterious man in black left, Yi Xian put away the immortal slaying sword gourd, and looked behind him. At this time, the black hole storm was only a few dozen feet behind him. He felt as if he was being torn apart by millions of horses. This power was simply too strong. Yi Xian retreated. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian left the black hole area and came to a starry sky. Looking at the black hole in front of him, Yi Xian was still somewhat afraid. The power of this black hole was not ordinary. Yi Xian glanced around, and then disappeared from where he stood. In a vast starry sky, Yuan Xiaodao was flying in the sky. At this time, she had never felt so relaxed before. This was because she had given up on targeting Yi Xian. This was not only giving up on targeting Yi Xian, but also letting go of the obsession in her heart. Letting go of the obsession could make her saber faster and stronger. At this time, a woman suddenly appeared in front of Yuan Xiaodao. The woman was dressed in a red dress. Her hair reached her waist, and she had a voluptuous figure. She looked extremely charming. This was a woman that would make any man impulsive. Yuan Xiaodao frowned when he saw who it was. It's you. The woman smiled and said, Accident. Yuan Xiaodao replied, It's indeed a little unexpected. The woman covered her mouth and giggled. Her giggling caused her huge breasts to tremble. It was a spectacular sight. Yuan Xiaodao glanced at the woman's chest. What's so great about them being big? The woman's lips curled up. Are you feeling inferior? Yuan Xiaodao smiled and said, Zhu Xie, I'll give you a small suggestion on account of our many years of friendship. This Yi Xian is very slippery. If you're not careful, you might lose your virginity instead of taking advantage of him. Lost my virginity? Zhu Xie suddenly giggled. Yuan Xiaodao, are you trying to kill me with laughter? Why did you lose your virginity? Yuan Xiaodao shrugged. I hope you have fun with him. I'll take my leave now. After saying that, she walked into the distance. At this moment, Zhu Xie suddenly appeared in front of Yuan Xiaodao. Why did you give up? Yuan Xiaodao smiled and said, Why do you guess? Zhu Xie looked at Yuan Xiaodao. The higher-ups are very disappointed in you, Yuan Xiaodao replied. So what if they're disappointed? Anyway, I'm not planning to go back. Zhu Xie frowned. Then where are you going? Yuan Xiaodao looked into the distance and said, Dual World Sky. Dual World Sky. Zhu Xie frowned. Now, you. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. Why? Can't I? Zhu Xie looked at Yuan Xiaodao. I'll say it again. Why should I give up? You're not someone who gives up easily. Not only that, you even suggested the higher-ups to shake hands with Yi Xian. This isn't your style at all. Yuan Xiaodao said softly. I'm a little tired. Anyway, I wish you guys a good time. Also, don't be careless when dealing with that Yi Xian. Otherwise, you might really lose your virginity. After saying that, she disappeared into the distance. On the spot, Zhu Xie remained silent. Yi Xian. She knew a lot about this person before coming. He was a swordsman. A talented swordsman. A swordsman with many backers. Not only did he have many backers, but they were also very mysterious. This was because Deity's Templar knew nothing about the people behind him. However, Deity's Templar didn't want to give up. Fifth dimension treasure. After a moment of silence, Jussier said softly, "Looks like I have to change my method." After saying that, she disappeared. Far away in the star field, within a black hole, a ray of sword light suddenly broke out from this black hole. The sword light dispersed. It was Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was in a sorry state. This was because he had passed through more than 10 black holes. At this moment, he suddenly understood one thing. And that was that this four-dimensional universe was very, very big. On the way back, he discovered some other black holes. He did not enter them, but he knew that outside of these black holes, there was definitely an unknown star field. The fourth dimension was very big. Yi Xian raised his head. Above the fourth dimension, there was still the fifth dimension. The boundless starry sky was endless. Yi Xian shook his head and returned to the north. The moment he reached the north, a lady in a red dress appeared in front of him. It was Jussier. Yi Xian paused. "You are?" Jussier smiled. "Deity's Templar. My name is Jussier. King Yi can call me Little Sier." Deity's Templar. Yi Xian was a little surprised. "Miss Zhu, where is Miss Yuan? Where is she?" Jussier rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. "Why? Am I not as good as her?" Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Zhu, if I'm not wrong, you're not here to flirt with me, right? Let's get straight to the point. You have to understand that I, Yi Xian, am a proper person." "A proper person?" Jussier giggled. "Most men who claim to be serious are all indecent." Yi Xian smiled. "Looks like Miss Zhu has no ill intentions towards me for now. What is Miss Zhu's purpose here? Just say it. This way we won't waste any time." Jussier looked at Yi Xian. "Venerable sword is in the north, right?" Yi Xian was about to speak, but suddenly, Jussier's eyes turned pink. The next moment, her eyes were like the vast starry sky. Yi Xian felt as though he was being sucked in. Yi Xian's eyes suddenly became a little sluggish. "Venerable sword. Wake up." At this moment, a voice rang out in Yi Xian's head. It was Venerable Sword's voice. Yi Xian's body shook. His eyes returned to normal as he retreated a few feet. In front of Yi Xian, Jussier's eyes flashed with astonishment. "You?" Yi Xian looked at Jussier. "What demonic art is this?" Jussier's lips curled up. "Guess." Yi Xian raged. "Guess your head." As he finished speaking, he waved his right hand and took out the immortal slaying sword gourd. The next moment, the executing heaven sword flew out from the gourd. Seeing the executing heaven sword, Jussier's face changed. Her right hand reached out and clenched. Returned to silence. Boom. The space in front of her was destroyed. The sword light around Yi Xian's executing heaven sword was also disappearing bit by bit. At this moment, another sword appeared in Yi Xian's hand. Soul-suppressing sword. Yi Xian raised his sword and pointed at Jussier. "Suppress." Soul-suppressing sword. In the distance, Jussier's face changed drastically again. At this moment, she felt as if her soul was about to be separated from her body. Without any hesitation, Jussier waved her hand and retreated explosively. This time, she retreated over 3 kilometers away. After she stopped, her expression instantly became extremely solemn. Yi Xian looked at Jussier. "Compared to Miss Yuan, you seem to be quite lacking." Jussier's lips curled up. "Is that so?" Yi Xian was about to speak when the space around her suddenly exploded. At this moment, he felt as if his body was about to be dismembered. Yi Xian suddenly roared with rage. In the next moment, a ray of sword light flashed. Chi! A tearing sound resounded. Boundless sword. When Yi Xian executed this move, Jussier's face changed drastically. She pushed her hands forward to block. At this moment, the space in front of her actually overlapped with each other. The sword arrived. Rumble. The space in front of Jussier exploded. However, she had mysteriously disappeared. Jussier did not disappear. Yi Xian had also disappeared without a trace. Above the clouds, Jussier scanned her surroundings. However, she did not feel Yi Xian's aura. Jussier frowned. How is this possible? At this moment, she suddenly turned around. The moment she turned, a sword slashed towards her face. Jussier waved her right hand. Boom! A strong force exploded between the two of them. Very quickly, Yi Xian retreated hundreds of feet away. Yi Xian was about to attack when Zhu Xier suddenly said, "Talk." Yi Xian looked at Zhu Xier and smiled. "Talk about what?" "Romance." Zhu Xier stared at Yi Xian. "If you don't want the northern region to become the target of everyone in the four-dimensional universe, then we better talk." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Your temple wants me dead, right?" Zhu Xier did not speak. Yi Xian smiled. "Under such circumstances, what do you think we have to talk about?" Zhu Xier smiled. "Anything can be discussed." Yi Xian said seriously, "Miss Zhu, I am speaking the truth. Senior Sword Venerable is really not in the northern region. If you want that treasure, you can go find Senior Sword Venerable. It's useless to find me." Zhu Xier smiled. "You are really cute when you lie. Really? This is the first time I have seen a swordsman lie without batting an eyelid. I am very curious. How do you lie without going against your conscience? Is it because you are thick-skinned?" "Yi Xian." Zhu Xier smiled. "I will let you give up." As she spoke, she waved her right hand, and a light screen appeared in front of Yi Xian. There was an image on the light screen. It was the image of Yi Xian and Sword Venerable in the courtyard. The last image was Yi Xian disappearing with Sword Venerable. However, an hour later, only Yi Xian appeared in the courtyard. Seeing this, Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "What else do you have to say?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Senior Sword Venerable is really not with me. I can swear I." At this moment, Sword Venerable suddenly appeared beside him. "Yi Xian." Zhu Xier looked at Sword Venerable, then looked at Yi Xian. "Swear. Swear it to me. Swear." Chapter 792. Yi Xian was a little speechless. He did not expect Venerable Sword to come out. Now that he was out, he was in trouble. Venerable Sword looked at Yi Xian and said apologetically, "Sorry for giving you so much trouble." Yi Xian smiled. "This is no trouble at all. After all, even without Senior, the temple will not let me off." Venerable Sword nodded and looked at Zhu Xier. "You are looking for me?" Zhu Xier looked at Venerable Sword and did not speak. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Don't you want the pagoda? Aren't you looking for Senior Venerable Sword? He is right here. Go ahead and hit him." Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian coldly. "Can you shut up?" Yi Xian said coldly. "Looks like your temple only knows how to bully the weak." Zhu Xier ignored Yi Xian and looked at Venerable Sword. "I am curious, why is Venerable Sword following this Yi Xian?" Venerable Sword was expressionless. "What has this got to do with you?" Zhu Xier squinted her eyes and her gaze turned cold. At this moment, Venerable Sword said again, "Isn't your temple looking for the old man? The old man is right here." Zhu Xier was silent. With her strength, she could not do anything to Venerable Sword. Not to mention that there was still Yi Xian beside him. Venerable Sword looked at Zhu Xier. "If there is anything, come and find me. This has nothing to do with little friend Yi, understand?" With that, he turned and disappeared. Back to the Prism Pagoda. To Venerable Sword, all he wanted to do now was to comprehend his Sword Dao. A breakthrough in his Sword Dao was his biggest goal in this life. As for the fifth dimension, he did not care anymore. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Xier. "Miss Zhu, take care. I will not send you off." Zhu Xier smiled. "Yi Xian, I am really curious. I am curious why Venerable Sword is following you, and even helping you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "My personal charm, I guess." Zhu Xier glared at Yi Xian. "If others knew that this Sword Lord was in your northern region, what do you think would happen?" Yi Xian shrugged. "What will happen? It was nothing more than a lot of people coming to the northern region. However, I can guarantee you that the one who benefits in the end will definitely not be your Divine Hall, because Senior Sword Master and I will definitely chase after your Divine Hall and fight." With that, he turned around and left. On the spot, Zhu Xier was silent for a moment before she disappeared. After Yi Xian returned to the northern region, he immediately went into seclusion. Comprehension. After returning from the Nether Hall, he had actually comprehended many things. Now he was going to completely comprehend these things and turn them into something useful. Cultivate. During this period of time, it was rare for the northern region to be peaceful. This could be said to be his chance. He needed to take advantage of this opportunity to improve his strength. Even though he could now fight evenly with Zhu Xier, he knew that this was far from enough. Yi Xian went into seclusion. During this period of time, Zhu Xier did not leave either. She wandered around the city, and in the end, she actually wandered all the way to the immortal Dao sect. This was also Yi Ling's territory. This undoubtedly affected the nerves of all the experts in the northern region, who didn't know the importance of Yi Ling now. That was Yi Xian's fate. Whoever dared to touch Yi Ling, Yi Xian would undoubtedly go crazy. Qiao Tianer and the rest were secretly on high alert, ready to act at any time. However, this Zhu Xier did not make a move against Yi Ling. Not only did she not make a move, she even taught Yi Ling. And in the end, she actually obtained the title of a guest in the immortal Dao sect. Everyone was astonished. What was going on? During this period of time, the northern region was in the dark. There were more experts around. Obviously, many people were still suspicious of Yi Xian. However, no one dared to make a move against Yi Xian, because right now, besides the Undying Temple, no one could be 100% sure that Venerable Sword was in the northern region. About half a month later, Yi Xian suddenly walked out of his room. Shangguan Xianer and Jiang Jiu had been waiting outside for a long time. Yi Xian took a deep breath. He opened his palm, and the Executing Heaven sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Yi Xian looked at the Executing Heaven sword in his hand and smiled. Sword. The moment he spoke, two sword intents suddenly swept out from the Executing Heaven sword. In an instant, one black and one white sword intent enveloped the surroundings. Sword intent. During this period of time, his biggest gain was sword intent. In the past, his sword and sword intent were separate. Sword intent was sword intent, and sword was sword. He did not combine the two. But now, he directly combined his sword intent with the Executing Heaven sword. In the past, he felt that sword intent was an illusory thing. But now, he felt that sword intent had life. Sword intent was born because of him. And he was the sword. By combining sword intent and sword intent, he could make his sword power stronger. In the past, he rarely used sword intent. But now he found that after he had perfectly combined sword intent and sword intent, the power of his sword skills could be increased by at least 30 to 40%. This improvement was very terrifying. In addition to the improvement of sword intent, during this period of time, he had also absorbed the sword skills and various sword principles contained in the sword manual. These had also greatly improved him. Now his entire state of mind had quietly changed. He stood there now, without the sharpness that he once had. Reserved. Now he was like a sword that had returned to its natural state. Of course, there was still some distance from the true return to its natural state. However, he had begun to move in this direction, because the more a person knew, the more they would be low-key and humble. His current understanding of swordsmanship was no longer the same as that of a young boy. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the two women. He smiled and said, "What's the matter?" Shangguan Xianer nodded. "That Zhu Xier is very close to Yi Ling." Yi Ling. Yi Xian nodded slightly. "I'll go see her." Shangguan Xianer glanced at Yi Xian. "Be careful." Yi Xian nodded. "Is there anything else?" Shangguan Xianer said, "There are still many people secretly spying on us. In the beginning, some people were quite subtle. But now more and more people are acting unscrupulously." Yi Xian nodded. "I'll take care of it." After saying that, he looked up at the sky. The next moment, he directly turned into a sword light and soared into the sky. After a few breaths, more than a dozen bloody heads fell directly from the sky. Seeing this scene, Shangguan Xianer and Jiang Jiu were stunned. What was Yi Xian trying to do? In the distant sky, above the clouds, Yi Xian glanced around and smiled slightly. "Do you think that my black-yellow great world is easy to bully? Or do you think that I, Yi Xian, am easy to bully?" There was no response. Yi Xian suddenly waved his right hand. The Executing Heaven sword flew out. A few hundred feet away, a head flew directly. Yi Xian glanced around again. Within 3 breaths. If there is anyone who is not from my northern region, within a radius of 100,000 miles, kill without mercy. Haha. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from afar. King Yi, how arrogant. As the voice fell, a middle-aged man walked out. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. This time, he directly used the immeasurable sword. When he sensed the power of Yi Xian's sword, the middle-aged man's face instantly changed. King Yi, please have mercy. Qi. Before the middle-aged man finished speaking, his head flew directly. Yi Xian glanced around coldly. Is there anyone else? There was no response. Yi Xian softly said, I have been too kind to you all, so you all think that I am easy to bully. All of you have come to find trouble with me again and again. With that said, he glanced coldly at the surroundings again. Now get out of my sight. Immediately. Some of the auras in the surroundings began to retreat. Soon, the people in hiding all left the northern region. In the air, Yi Xian withdrew his gaze and directly flew to the Immortal Dao sect. When they saw Yi Xian, the entire Immortal Dao sect was in an uproar. The current Yi Xian was very famous in the Black-Yellow Great World. Not just because he was the current master of the Xuanhuan Great World, but also because he was a swordsman, and a young swordsman at that. There were many legends about Yi Xian in the Black-Yellow Great World. Soon more and more Immortal Dao sect experts arrived at the Immortal Dao Temple. As soon as Yi Xian arrived, Yi Ling ran out. When she saw Yi Xian, Yi Ling smiled brightly. Big brother. With that, she flew toward Yi Xian. When she arrived before Yi Xian, and was about to throw herself into Yi Xian's arms, she suddenly thought of something and quickly stopped. She looked to the side and saw that countless Immortal Dao sect disciples had gathered. Yi Ling secretly looked around, and then grabbed Yi Xian's arm. Big brother, why are you here? Yi Xian smiled. Naturally, I came to see you. How is it? Is everything going smoothly here? Yi Ling nodded. Everything is going smoothly. There are now more than 1,000 people in the Immortal Dao sect. Moreover, there are 7 ascending ice realm experts. Not only that, but there are also 2 unknown realm experts. Yi Xian laughed. Amazing, amazing. He naturally knew about these 2 unknown realm experts, because he had sent them to protect Yi Ling. However, after coming to the Immortal Dao sect, they truly liked this place. This was because the benefits here were really good. This was naturally because of Yi Xian. The entire Northern Territory and the Black-Yellow Chronicle took great care of the Immortal Dao sect. When the Immortal Dao sect disciples went out, others would give them some face. This was because everyone knew how much Yi Xian doted on his little sister. At this moment, Yi Ling suddenly smiled. Big brother, I met a big sister. Come. With that, she turned to look. Not far away, a woman in a red dress slowly walked over. She had a charming smile on her face. This person was Zhu Xia walked to Yi Ling's side and gently rubbed Yi Ling's head. Then she looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Congratulations, King Yi. Your strength has increased a lot. Yi Xian smiled. Many thanks. Zhu Xia looked at Yi Xian and sent a voice transmission. I heard that you care about your little sister a lot. Why? Aren't you afraid that I will target her? Yi Xian smiled. No. Zhu Xia's eyes narrowed. You think I don't dare? Yi Xian shook his head. It's because you won't. Zhu Xia was slightly startled. Why? Yi Xian said softly. The pride of the strong. You and Miss Yuan are both top experts. Although I am your enemy, I know that you have your pride. You will not do such despicable things. Hearing this, Zhu Xia fell silent. P.S. Speaking of which, do you think that in the entire universe, there are only us Earthlings? Recently, when I read about the universe, I suddenly realized that our Earth is very, very small. No, it's our solar system that is very, very small. How big is the universe? Chapter 793. The Pride of the Strong. Yi Xian realized a problem. Up until now, the opponents he had met rarely used such despicable methods to deal with him. Whether it was Yuan Xiaodao or the other experts, none of them had said anything about targeting Yi Xian's family and friends. Why? Because these people had cultivated to this level, they had their own pride. Of course, not everyone would be like this. But now, the majority of the enemies did not say that they could not deal with Yi Xian, so they targeted Yi Ling. Although the number of enemies was increasing, and they were getting stronger, the quality of the enemies was also getting higher. Thinking of this, Yi Xian could not help but shake his head and smile. Was this a good thing? In front of Yi Xian, Zhu Xier shook her head and smiled. She looked at Yi Ling and said, I want to have a chat with your brother. Yi Ling looked at the two of them and said, All right. After saying this, she turned and left. Yi Xian and Zhu Xier found a place to sit. There were only the two of them. Zhu Xier said softly, King Yi, I will not beat around the bush. This time, I represent Deity's Templar, and want to have a chat with you. Yi Xian smiled and said, You did not intend to talk at the start, right? Zhu Xier shook her head and said, No, after a god was killed, we already wanted to talk with you. But we knew that talking with you would not have any results. Because you will not give up the fifth dimensional treasure. So, we placed our hopes on Yuan Xiaodao. But she gave up. Not only did she give up, she suggested that we not target you anymore. Deity's Templar still holds her words in high regard, because we are very clear of her strength. Since she chose to give up, she must have met with something. After saying this, she looked at Yi Xian and said, We have no choice but to talk now. What about you? Are you willing to talk? Yi Xian smiled and said, If I am not wrong, if I am not willing, then you will have to pay any price. Am I right? Zhu Xier nodded. Yes, because we have no other choice. Yi Xian smiled and said, Just because that fifth dimensional treasure can bring you guys to the fifth dimension? Zhu Xier pointed at the starry sky far away. Do you know how many geniuses have fallen in the dual realm sky? Many, many, many. So many that the fifth dimension of the dual realm sky is filled with the corpses of all kinds of monstrous geniuses. As she said that, she slowly closed her eyes. Many people have reached the end of the fourth dimension. If they can't break through, they will die of old age. An expert, a super expert will eventually die of old age. Can you understand how they feel? Yi Xian softly said, So this treasure of the fifth dimension is their hope, right? Zhu Xier nodded. Yes. Of course, currently, only my divine palace knows that the fifth dimensional treasure is in your hands. Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian. Can we work together? Yi Xian said. How? Zhu Xier said solemnly. We want to invite you to the headquarters of Divine Palace, which is the ruins of God. One of our seniors wants to personally see this treasure of yours. Yi Xian smiled and said, Can I come back if I go? Zhu Xier nodded. Yes. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't believe you. That is your territory. Zhu Xier said, Is there a difference if he comes or you go? Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian and said, We don't want to be enemies with you, because we don't have full confidence in dealing with the person behind you. Even if we snatch the treasure from you, the revenge of the person behind you will be too much for us to handle. So we choose to work with you. It's a win-win situation for everyone. We just want to understand the fifth dimension and go there. If our goal doesn't conflict with yours, you can choose to work with us because there are many benefits. Benefits? Yi Xian smiled and said, What kind of benefits? Zhu Xier smiled and said, For example, we can help you solve some of your problems. Yi Xian frowned and said, What problems? Zhu Xier looked at the sky and said, Do you know how many life realm experts are hiding in the dark? Yi Xian shook his head. He really didn't know. He couldn't sense experts of the life realm yet. Zhu Xier smiled and said, No less than 6. 6. Yi Xian's face darkened. So there were so many of them. Zhu Xier said again, We can help you block them. Not only that, we can help you improve. Of course, in return, you need to help us understand the fifth dimension treasure. Don't worry, we won't use force anymore because the treasure has already recognized you as its owner. Our goal is to understand the fifth dimension through it. If possible, we can use it to enter the fifth dimension. Of course, this depends on the situation and we won't force it. Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Xier smiled and said, How about it? Yi Xian said softly, What you said is very good. However, have you ever thought of a problem? If I go to your godly empty land, I will be meat on your chopping board. Isn't it up to you to decide how you want to cut me? Jussier nodded and said, You are right. Therefore it is up to you. As she said this, she looked at the sky and smiled and said, Let me tell you something. There will be more and more people coming here. Yixian smiled and said, I will go with you to the godly empty land. Jussier looked at Yixian and said, Are you serious? Yixian nodded and said, I am serious. However, I have 2 conditions. Jussier said, Tell me. Yixian said, First, I need 2 life realm experts to guard the black-yellow great world for me. I want this place to be safe. Is that okay? Jussier was silent for a while and said, Okay, we will send people to guard this place. 2 life realm experts are more than enough. He basically didn't have a single moment of rest. Yixian looked at Jiang Jiao and said, The 2 of you have to be careful. This place is a little complicated, and there are many people with intentions. Don't be careless and underestimate the enemy. Understand? Jiang Jiao nodded. You have to be careful when you go to the ruins of God. Yixian smiled. Don't worry, I still have the ability to escape. After explaining some matters to the 2 girls, Yixian came to Enlanxio's courtyard. At this moment, Enlanxio hadn't come out of seclusion. After eating that earth celestial pill, Enlanxio had been in seclusion until now. He knew that be it Seven or Enlanxio, when he saw them again, their strength would definitely have earth-shattering changes. After a moment of silence, Yixian turned around and left. An hour later, Yixian came to the vast starry sky and Jussier had been waiting for a long time. Yixian smiled. Lady Zhu, please. Jussier nodded. King Yi, forgive me for being straightforward. Having too many ties might not be a good thing. Yixian suddenly asked, Does Lady Zhu have any relatives? Jussier said indifferently, Of course. However, some have already turned to dust. Yixian smiled. Lady Zhu doesn't have anyone that you care about? Jussier smiled. What are you trying to say? Yixian said softly, If a person doesn't have a few friends and no relatives that they care about, this person should be quite pitiful. As for the ties that Lady Zhu mentioned, forgive me for being straightforward. When our parents gave birth to us, weren't we ties and troubles for them when we were young? Just as Jussier was about to speak, something strange happened. The space around the 2 of them collapsed, and at the same time, countless blood-red chains appeared around the 2 of them. Chapter 794. This sudden change caused Yixian and Jussier to frown. Yixian looked at Jussier. Your men? Jussier replied solemnly. Don't think too much. They are not from Deity's Templar. Not from Deity's Templar. Yixian frowned. If they were not from Deity's Templar, then who were they? At this moment, the space around him and Jussier suddenly turned illusory. Those strange red chains. Yixian looked at Jussier. The latter waved her hand, and a strong force was emitted from her hand. Rumble. In an instant, the space around them started to tremble. But the red chains were not damaged at all. The red chains were like a cage, trapping the 2 of them in place. Seeing this, Jussier frowned. At this moment, Yixian suddenly said, Call for help. Jussier looked at Yixian. Yixian said indifferently, Since the other party knows about us but still dares to attack, do you think they are ordinary people? Hurry up and call for help. Jussier looked around. Who would have thought that just as Deity's Templar formed an alliance with you, someone would jump out? Yixian did not expect this as well. Someone had been waiting in the dark for an opportunity. Jussier said solemnly, My men, there is still an hour left. We have to hold on for an hour. Just as Yixian was about to speak, the blood-red chains suddenly started shuttling back and forth. Following that, a powerful force surged towards Yixian and Jussier. Jussier's face changed. This is a barrier. As she said, she looked at Yixian. Use your sword. Executing Heaven Sword. Yixian nodded. He pulled out his sword and slashed. Chi. The Executing Heaven Sword slashed out. Boom. In front of Yixian, a blood-red chain was broken. Zhu Xie's expression eased up slightly when she saw this scene. But in the next moment, her expression became extremely unsightly, because the blood-red chain that had been severed had automatically healed itself. Not only that, but the blood in her and Yi Xian's bodies also began to tremble at this moment, as if their blood vessels were about to burst open. Yi Xian frowned. Targeting blood? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Soon, the blood in his body gradually calmed down. What a joke! His blood was alive, and it had a temper. How could it be so easily affected by other people's blood? However, Zhu Xian's face was getting uglier by the second. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Xier. Miss Zhu, do you need help? Zhu Xier replied indifferently. No need. As soon as she finished speaking, her hands suddenly pressed down. Rumble. A strong force swept out from her body. In an instant, the blood in her body returned to normal. Yi Xian was just about to speak when the space around him and Zhu Xier suddenly turned into a sea of blood. Not only that, the blood-red chains were slicing towards him and Zhu Xier like blades. Rumble. Around them, the endless starry skies began to tremble violently. It was as if there was a huge earthquake. It was incomparably shocking. Zhu Xier's eyes flashed with seriousness. She looked at Yi Xian. Be careful. With that, she clasped her hands together. Boom! An invisible force suddenly flashed out from her body. This force blocked the sea of blood around them. But at this moment, blood-red ghost faces suddenly appeared from within the sea of blood. These ghost faces were malevolent, and they howled and roared like evil spirits from the depths of hell. Beside Yi Xian, Zhu Xier's face changed. You are the blood ancestor. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Xier. Blood ancestor? Who? Zhu Xier said solemnly. An expert not weaker than Venerable Sword. Not weaker than Venerable Sword. Yi Xian's face turned solemn. He was very clear of Venerable Sword's strength. Although Venerable Sword was only a life realm expert, he was definitely not an ordinary life realm expert. After all, even within the same realm, there were differences in strength. And this blood ancestor was definitely not an ordinary life realm expert. Otherwise, Zhu Xier wouldn't be so afraid. Zhu Xier stared into the distance. Could it be that you also want that fifth-dimensional treasure? At this moment, a laugh came from the sea of blood. Who doesn't want that fifth-dimensional treasure? But this time, the old man is here for the bloodline of this little brat beside you. For Yi Xian's bloodline? Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian, a little confused. Yi Xian was also a little confused. For his bloodline? Blood ancestor laughed. Rumor has it that King Ye's bloodline is extraordinary. Seeing it today, it is indeed true. Your bloodline is not affected by my blood technique at all. It seems that it is not an ordinary bloodline. Yi Xian looked in front of him. Are you here for my bloodline? Blood ancestor laughed. Yes, King Yi. Don't resist. In my blood array, not to mention the two of you, even the lady in purple behind you can't do anything. Yi Xian said solemnly. What do you want? Zhu Xier, who was at the side, suddenly said. He wants to devour your bloodline. This is how he gets stronger. The better the bloodline, the more valuable it is to him. Devour my bloodline. Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Xier said. If you have any trump cards, don't hide them. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Xier. Lady Zhu, you are a super expert of Undying Temple. Shouldn't you be the one to perform now? Zhu Xier was silent for a moment. Then she waved her right hand, and a full moon flew out from her palm. But in the next moment, this full moon was swallowed by countless blood faces. Zhu Xier said solemnly. In this blood array, I can't do anything to him. As she spoke, she looked at Blood Ancestor. You must have been here for a long time. But what surprised me is that Undying Temple didn't know anything about it. Blood Ancestor laughed. Do you think Undying Temple is omnipotent? Huh? As Blood Ancestor laughed, a blood shadow suddenly pounced at Yi Xian. Zhu Xier's face changed. She was about to attack when countless blood faces appeared around her. Then like a tidal wave they drowned her. In this short time, the blood shadow was already in front of Yi Xian. In the next moment, Yi Xian saw a face. This blood face belonged to Blood Ancestor. Blood Ancestor laughed malevolently. Stop struggling. As he spoke, he pounced at Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not struggle. He allowed Blood Ancestor to pounce into his body. The moment Blood Ancestor entered Yi Xian's body, a blood light swept out from Yi Xian's body. At the same time, Yi Xian's eyes turned into a sea of blood. Haha. At this time, Blood Ancestor's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. It is indeed a top-quality bloodline. Top quality, haha. His laughter was filled with excitement, and even a trace of madness. This was because he had not seen such a top-quality bloodline in a long time. No, he had never seen such a top-quality bloodline before. At this time, the bloodline in Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled. In the next moment, a powerful bloodline power rushed towards Blood Ancestor's blood. The crazy demon bloodline was starting to retaliate. At this time, Blood Ancestor's disdainful voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind again. Still want to retaliate? What a joke, ah. Suddenly, the Blood Ancestor's voice became frightened. How is this possible? Ah, impossible. What kind of bloodline is this? Ah, screams kept ringing in Yi Xian's mind. After a while, Blood Ancestor's voice disappeared completely. The aura in Yi Xian's body skyrocketed at this moment. The speed of the increase was extremely shocking, like a volcano suddenly erupting. Boom! Boom! The sea of blood around him began to rush towards Yi Xian. Absorb. Yi Xian was still absorbing the blood crazily. No, it was not Yi Xian who was absorbing, but his bloodline itself. He could not control it anymore. After devouring the Blood Ancestor, he wanted to stop. The energy was too terrifying, and his body could not hold it anymore. However, the power of his bloodline did not want to stop. It was not that he did not want to stop, but that he could not stop. His blood was still madly absorbing, and he could not stop it at all. Once the power of his bloodline was activated, it would no longer be under his control. After devouring the Blood Ancestor, the power of his bloodline was so strong that Yi Xian was dumbfounded. He was completely dumbfounded now. He did not know to what extent his blood had reached, but he knew that if this continued, he would be toyed to death by his own blood, because the skin around his body was already starting to crack. His physical body could no longer withstand the power of his bloodline. Who would believe this? His physical body could not withstand the power of his bloodline. The problem was that after devouring the Blood Ancestor, the bloodline was not satisfied. It still wanted to devour the sea of blood around him. Ah! At this time, Yi Xian suddenly roared. Stop now, I can't hold it anymore. From afar, Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian with a face full of confusion. What was going on? She was also a little confused now. Boom. At this time, a strong blood radiance suddenly swept out from Yi Xian's body, and this strong blood radiance sent Zhu Xier flying a few hundred feet away. After Zhu Xier stopped, she looked at Yi Xian not far away, her eyes filled with disbelief. This? How is this possible? From afar, Yi Xian's aura was still rising crazily, and the sea of blood around him was almost completely absorbed by him. However, his body's condition was getting worse. His blood was getting stronger, but this bloodline did not care about his physical body at all. Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily. If you don't stop, I will be toyed to death by you. However, the bloodline did not stop, and at this time, many parts of his body had already split open, but no blood flowed out, which was very strange. At this time, Yi Xian fell straight down, his eyes filled with confusion. This daddy is going to be toyed to death by myself. P.S. Yet he was gone without a trace. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Zhu, can you wait for me? After I recuperate, we will set off for the ruins of God. Zhu Xier said solemnly. Is he really dead? Yi Xian nodded. Dead? He can't be more dead than dead. Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian. How did you do it? Yi Xian said with a smile. To tell you the truth, I really didn't do anything. He killed himself. This was the truth. If the Blood Ancestor had fought him head-on, he definitely wouldn't have been able to win. But the Blood Ancestor was arrogant, and came to devour his bloodline. Was his bloodline that easy to devour? That was a bloodline that even he couldn't handle. One had to admit that the power of this bloodline was too sick. Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian. You recuperate first. With that, she retreated to the side. Yi Xian sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. Although he devoured the blood ancestor, he realized that he didn't change at all. There was no change at all. Not even the slightest bit stronger. This was something that he couldn't understand. After a while, Yi Xian seemed to understand. This time, the power of the bloodline was stronger. It had nothing to do with him. That's not right. It should be said that the power of the bloodline was more terrifying than before. But his cultivation level didn't increase at all. And if he wanted to obtain the power of the bloodline, he had to activate it first. But if he didn't activate it, the power of the bloodline would be useless. To put it simply, the bloodline was like an individual. Of course, this individual was also a part of Yi Xian. This was because the bloodline depended on him to survive. But he still couldn't fully control this bloodline. Especially after the bloodline absorbed the blood ancestor. It became even more terrifying. What level had this bloodline reached? He didn't know. He didn't dare to activate it. Because before he absorbed the blood ancestor, he already couldn't control it. And now, after absorbing the blood ancestor, he didn't know what level the bloodline had reached. Therefore, he didn't dare to activate it. If he wasn't careful, he could be killed by his own bloodline. Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. This bloodline was too weird. His intuition told him that this bloodline had reached an extremely terrifying level. Once he activated this bloodline, either his enemies died or he died. Or everyone died together. Moments later, Yi Xian stood up. He looked at the storage ring in his hand. This was what he had obtained from the blood ancestor. But he couldn't open this storage ring now. Because there were 3 restrictions in this storage ring. He didn't dare to force it open. Because if he did, he might cause the storage ring to self-destruct. And he didn't trust Zhu Xier. Therefore, he could only temporarily give up on the things in the storage ring. Yi Xian kept the storage ring and walked to Zhu Xier's side. He smiled. Miss Zhu, let's go. Zhu Xie looked at Yi Xian. Have you rested enough? Yi Xian nodded. Almost. Zhu Xier hesitated and asked. King Yi, do you have a lot of the spring of life? Yi Xian said with a straight face. No, I just drank up all of my stock. Really? Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian. I won't take it for free. How about I buy a bottle from you? Yi Xian shook his head. I don't have it. I really don't have it. Zhu Xier said solemnly. Half a bottle. How about it? Yi Xian was about to speak when Zhu Xier said, I'm willing. Yi Xian was shocked. You're willing to marry me? Zhu Xier suddenly waved her right hand. Boom. Yi Xian was sent flying hundreds of feet away. After Yi Xian stopped, Zhu Xier was about to attack again. Yi Xian quickly said, I'm just joking. Zhu Xier stopped. She looked at Yi Xian coldly and turned to leave. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Zhu Xier. He smiled and waved his right hand. 2 white jade bottles appeared in front of Zhu Xier. Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian said with a smile, These 2 bottles are for Miss Zhu. Zhu Xier raised her eyebrows. For me? Yi Xian nodded. For you. Zhu Xier stared at Yi Xian. Do you know how precious this is? Yi Xian nodded. I know. Zhu Xier asked. Then why are you giving it to me? Yi Xian smiled. Why? You don't want it? Zhu Xier kept the 2 bottles of Spring of Life and looked at Yi Xian. I'll remember this favor. Yi Xian smiled and didn't say anything. A moment later, the 2 continued on their journey to the ruins of gods, which was also the real lair of God Templar. 2 days later, Yi Xian found that there were suddenly more powerful auras around him. Yi Xian frowned. At this time Zhu Xier suddenly said, It's one of us. Yi Xian nodded slightly and said with a smile, Escort me? Zhu Xier said, You can say so. As she said, she looked at Yi Xian. Let me ask you something. You don't have to say it. Yi Xian smiled. Ask away. Zhu Xier said solemnly. That lady behind you, how strong is she? Lady in plain dress. Right now, everyone in the 4-dimensional universe was curious about this woman. What kind of expert was she? Yi Xian thought about it and said, How strong she is, I don't know either. Zhu Xier stared at Yi Xian. You don't know either? Yi Xian nodded. I don't know. As he said, he looked at Zhu Xier. Miss Zhu, can you tell me how your God Templar sees her? Zhu Xier was silent for a moment before asking. Unfathomable. Unfathomable, Yi Xian said with a smile. Then why are you still trying to kill me? Zhu Xier looked at Yi Xian. That's what we think. If she is really undefeatable, why didn't she just kill her way into our God Templar? But she didn't do so, so there are only two reasons. First, she's being held back by something. Second, although she is strong, she isn't as strong as we thought. She doesn't dare to come to our God Templar, because she is afraid of us. So we bet on the second reason. Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Xier continued. But as we investigated further, and with the appearance of those people behind you, we felt that we might have underestimated her. Yi Xian smiled. I also feel that you have underestimated her. Although he didn't know how strong the lady in plain dress was, he knew that she wasn't someone ordinary people could fight against. After all, how strong was the big shot in the 8th level of the World Prison Pagoda? But wasn't she also afraid of the lady in plain dress? From his point of view, this God Templar couldn't even compare to the 8th level. Zhu Xier said softly. I understand Yuan Xiaodao a little now. After interacting with Yi Xian, she also realized that Yi Xian was a little terrifying. Putting everything else aside, she still didn't know how the blood ancestor died not long ago. He was a life realm expert after all. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.